Daenerys Targaryen stood at the prow of the modest galley, the soft hiss of the dark water beneath her, a lullaby that failed to soothe her restlessness. She had never yearned to see Valyria. Even her ancestors had spoken of its ruins in whispers. Its name was cloaked in dread and soot-black memories, and the ghost stories that had reached her ears were enough to sharpen a cautious edge within her. Yet here she was, venturing into the cradle of dragon lords and devastation alike, drawn by a rumor that would not release her from its talons. The wind snagged at her hair, whipping the pale strands across her face. Somewhere within her chest, a spark of excitement mingled with apprehension. The possibility she had discovered, an egg hidden since before the doom, and not just any egg but supposedly once belonging to the greatest of them all, had ignited a flicker of hope in her heart. The notion was almost absurd, a child's fancy. But Daenerys had learned that impossibilities could indeed materialize if one believed strongly enough. She felt the sway of the ship and gripped the worn wood, letting the sea spray lightly across her cheeks. Her clothing was plain for this voyage. Simple breeches, a loose tunic under a cloak of dull gray. She traveled lightly, with a small band of loyal Unsullied on the deck below, and Ser Jorah at her side. Though she had soared across seas once upon the backs of her living dragons, something about this journey felt unusually personal, almost intimate, as though the run-down vessel was guiding her deeper into her own legacy. Jorah's gaze shifted anxiously each time the wind picked up. He did not trust the waters around Valyria. No one did. Rumor and legend spoke of the many ships that had drifted into these waters, only to vanish, undone by the same fiery curse that had befallen the ancient freehold. She turned to find him standing just a few paces behind, his eyes narrowed against the gloom. The sky had already turned a sullen gray, as if the closer they drew to Valyria, the less color dared to remain. He wore a sparse beard grown from weeks of travel. The lines in his face seemed deeper, carved by worry and devotion and regrets that followed him like a shadow. He stepped forward, the boards creaking beneath his boots, and inclined his head respectfully before addressing her. His voice was a cautious hush. "We will reach the outer edges soon, Your Grace. The captain believes it best to anchor before the sun sets fully. These waters aren't safe by day, and even less so by night." "I understand," Daenerys replied, keeping her voice steady. "We should do as he advises." She glanced off at the horizon, where the sun was sinking like a wounded beast, half veiled by distant columns of smoke or steam from volcanic fissures that dotted the region. "I would rather not invite the wrath of whatever ghosts linger here." She could not deny her own mixture of eagerness and trepidation. If the rumors were false, it would be a bitter disappointment, another myth, another dead end. But if they were true, she could hardly imagine holding an egg rumored to be Balerion's. Balerion the Black Dread, her ancestor Aegon's monstrous mount, the largest dragon ever known. The thought of something so extraordinary, still existing in the ruins of Valyria, made her heart pound. Something about it also made her blood run cold. Valyria was the place from which all Targaryen greatness had sprung, and where the cataclysm that nearly ended them had erupted in molten death. She recalled, almost absently, how she had once walked unscorched from a pyre that hatched 3 dragon eggs. Though she had grown confident in her bond with dragons, each new step carried a sense of stepping deeper into an unwritten page of her family's story. She touched her abdomen absent-mindedly, as though seeking reassurance in her own warmth. Memories flickered. The sweetness of victory when she broke chains and freed slaves, the heartbreak of betrayals, the burden of losing loved ones. So many scars had shaped her. Now here was another test, perhaps orchestrated by fate or the gods of old Valyria, to see what she would do with such an inheritance. She half smiled at the thought, but her expression faded when a harsh gust of wind threw salt-laden spray against her. "I'll stay on deck a while longer," she said to Jorah. "I need to clear my head." Jorah dipped his chin, his loyalty unwavering. "Very well, Khaleesi. I'll speak with the captain. We'll drop anchor soon." Left alone with the wind and the undulating sea, Daenerys let her mind drift back to that moment when the rumor first reached her. An old fisherman, in a battered tavern near Meereen, had sworn he saw a shard of dragon eggshell, the size of a child's fist, in the hands of a reckless smuggler. The smuggler had bragged to his fellow cutthroats, drunk on wine, that he'd just returned from the cursed shores of the Valyrian peninsula, where a secret nest, unspoiled for centuries, was said to lie hidden within the labyrinth of half-sunken ruins. The fisherman, fearful and deeply superstitious, had tried to dissuade him from returning. He claimed men who ventured into Valyria never came back or returned with half their minds intact. But the smuggler had laughed, proclaiming that one day soon he'd retrieve something more precious, a relic that none before him had dared to steal. A large egg, black and red as the heart of a dying star. She had listened to the fisherman's story with a mixture of skepticism and yearning. Over time, she'd gleaned enough rumors to piece together something that sounded plausible. That deep within the molten, desolate ruin that was once the heart of civilization, there might be a single dragon egg of a lineage older than any living memory. Balerion's egg. Her curiosity, her hope, and her Targaryen blood had urged her forward on a path that no one else would dare. Eventually, the final traces of sunlight bled from the horizon, and the ship anchored. The sails were taken down, the lines secured, while a hush fell over the small crew. No one spoke above a whisper. Even in the heart of the night, the waters around Valyria seemed lit by an eerie glow, as if undercurrents of fire threaded through the depths. There were small flickers like smoldering coals, and the wind carried a faint scent of sulfur. Daenerys withdrew to her cabin but found sleep elusive. She took to pacing the cramped quarters. Some hours later, she forced herself to lie down, though she did not drift off until well after the moon had reached its zenith. She dreamed of dragons that night, nightmares and wonders. They emerged from swirling banks of ashen fog, faces contorted in silent roars, eyes glowing with ancient fury. She saw the silhouette of a monstrous creature, wings spanning the whole sky, a shadow that devoured the horizon. Then she glimpsed something small, tucked away in a corner of a ruin, an egg wreathed in shadow, pulsing like a heartbeat. When it cracked open, the dream ended in a flash of fire. Daenerys woke in the gray pre-dawn, drenched in sweat. It took her several long moments to calm the frantic pounding of her heart. She rose, splashed cold water on her face, and dressed without ceremony. She was grateful for the simple traveling clothes that made her feel more a wanderer than a queen. Outside, the world felt hushed, suspended in an uneasy calm. She joined Jorah on the deck, where the men had already begun to prepare a smaller skiff that would ferry them closer to shore. The approach to Valyria was treacherous, strewn with crumbled towers and half-sunken walkways that made it impossible for larger vessels to navigate. The captain, a wiry man with haunted eyes, offered directions more than enthusiasm. He had only brought them this far because he was handsomely paid, and because Daenerys Targaryen's reputation was not something one took lightly. With a trembling hand, he pointed toward a jagged outline on the horizon, a place where twisted spires rose like the ribs of a great beast, half consumed by volcanic rock. "That's the fringe of the old city," he said through cracked lips. "We go no closer. The fumes, the unpredictable currents, it's not safe." Daenerys could only nod. She understood that there was a limit to how far ordinary men could go. She and her small company would have to brave the labyrinth on foot. She motioned for Jorah to gather the supplies, a week's worth of dried rations, wineskins filled with fresh water, ropes, torches, and anything else that might prove useful in the crumbling ruins. The Unsullied had formed a quiet perimeter, their spears upright, their faces impassive. She did not expect an army's worth of trouble here, but she knew enough to guard against the unknown. Stone men driven mad by grayscale, or worse yet, things that were rumored to lurk in the shadows of Valyria. The skiff rocked dangerously as it was lowered into the water. Daenerys maintained her balance with practice, drawing her cloak tighter as she stepped in, followed by Jorah and 8 Unsullied. The rest of her guard remained on the main ship to protect it. This was a small expedition, meant to slip in and out quietly. The oarsmen pulled with solemn faces, none daring to speak as they cut across the steaming waters. Strange currents brushed beneath them, shifting the boat in sudden, unpredictable ways. At times it felt as though an undersea beast had nudged them. Daenerys kept one hand on the boat's edge, the other braced on her thigh. She could see that the water was not truly black, but a dark mosaic of shimmering red and molten orange. By late morning, the party reached the edge of a shallow stretch of collapsed causeways that led into the partial remains of a once grand avenue. The street was flanked by towering statues of dragon lords, many broken at the waist, their visages eroded by centuries of sulfur and ash. Fissures in the ground exhaled clouds of scorching steam, and the stench of brimstone hung over everything. The air was thick, almost suffocating. If not for the occasional gust of sea breeze, Daenerys might have found it hard to breathe. She disembarked, her boots sinking into the muddy gravel at the water's edge. Every step produced the sound of sucking mud and grinding stone. The 8 Unsullied fanned out, forming a protective half-circle around her and Jorah as they moved inland. The path soon deteriorated into fractured cobblestones. Each footfall had to be chosen carefully, lest the ground crumble beneath them. Above, the sky was a turmoil of smoke and gray cloud, blocking out much of the sunlight and casting Valyria in perpetual twilight. Once they ventured deeper, ruins rose like silent ghosts to greet them. Toppled arches, colonnades that ended abruptly in jagged shards, and intricate carvings on half-standing walls that depicted dragons in flight. Men forging spells in large forges, and exalted kings riding winged beasts. They walked slowly, absorbing the sense of loss that hung over the place. This had once been the epicenter of a civilization that dwarfed all others, a place where 1,000 roads had converged from the furthest corners of Essos, where knowledge, magic, and dragonfire had mingled to create wonders beyond compare. Now, it was a graveyard. Daenerys paused often to study the carvings, tracing her gloved fingertips over the ancient stone as if seeking to bridge the centuries that separated her from her ancestors. She had always felt a pang when thinking of Valyria, that mixture of pride and fear braided together. For all the freehold sins, its cruelty, its slaves, its thirst for dominion, there had been splendor too. Did her ancestors regret what was lost, or did they see the doom as an inevitable punishment for their arrogance? She wondered what Rhaegar would have made of this place, or Aegon the Conqueror himself. Did they feel the breath of centuries at their backs, urging them forward, or warning them away? Jorah walked carefully at her side, mindful of every loose stone. Occasionally she felt his gaze flicker to her, as though to reassure himself she was still there, as though the city might devour her at any moment. She did not object to his concern. In truth, she was glad for it. Even the Unsullied, in their disciplined silence, seemed edgy. They held their spears with the readiness of men who expected an ambush around every corner. They were trained to fight human foes, but what if Valyria hid terrors beyond mortal comprehension? For a time, they ventured through a maze of partial walls and archways, picking their way over debris. Once or twice, they heard faint echoes that might have been the wind howling through a broken spire, or something else. Daenerys' pulse quickened whenever the sound drifted through the air. She could almost feel the city breathing around her, as if the ground beneath her feet had a subterranean heartbeat of molten rock. They found a place to rest beside what had once been a courtyard, now half filled with stagnant water. Broken columns jutted from the pool like the bones of fallen giants. The group paused to drink from their skins, the Unsullied remaining vigilant. As she sipped the tepid water, Daenerys could not help but recall the stories of those who had braved Valyria's ruins. Most never returned. Those who did sometimes came back changed, as though a piece of their soul had been trapped among the ruins. Were they all undone by illusions, or was there something darker waiting in the corners? She expelled a slow breath. She thought of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, her beloved children. She imagined how they might have reacted to this place, their ancestral homeland of sorts. Though removed by countless generations, would they have been excited or wary? Daenerys felt a pang of loss. She still carried the burdens of the past, but she was forging forward, always forward. They moved on. The hours slipped by slowly. Each new street or broken tower seemed the same, yet occasionally they came upon details that made the city feel alive in memory. A mosaic floor depicting fiery serpents, a towering statue of a robed figure with a dragon perched on his shoulder, the remains of a bridge that had spanned a river of lava, long cooled into black glass. The air stung their eyes and filled their lungs with grit. More than once, they had to skirt around wide fissures that exhaled plumes of poisonous vapor. Daenerys took care to keep the cloth of her cloak across her mouth when passing through those steaming clouds. At times, she caught glimpses of movement far off in the distance, a shape darting behind a wall or a shadow slinking across a fallen column. Stone men, she wondered, or merely the illusions of a city that toyed with one's mind. They did not investigate. Instead, the group pressed on, determined to find what they sought before nightfall. She knew it might take more than one day's search, but for now, they had daylight left. She refused to rest until the last rays of light slipped away, not wanting to linger in any one spot too long, as if remaining in place might wake Valyria's ghosts. Jorah suggested they find a place to camp by mid-afternoon, but Daenerys insisted they continue. The rumor of the egg spurred her on like an invisible tether. She could feel it, distant yet compelling, as though it called her from deep within these blackened ruins. It felt foolish to rely on intuition alone, but she had learned to trust the instincts that coiled in her blood. She remembered the day when she had stepped into Drogo's pyre, her heart brimming with conviction that the flames would not consume her. She remembered the morning she had felt Drogon's wings on the wind before he ever appeared on the horizon. This was like that, a silent melody that resonated through her heritage, guiding her steps. They passed under a half-collapsed tunnel that might have been part of some aqueduct or walkway. The ceiling overhead cracked in multiple places. Sulfur-laced water dripped steadily. The space echoed with every breath they took, every footstep. A feeling of foreboding settled on them, though nothing leapt from the shadows. On the other side of the tunnel, the ground sloped downward into a bowl-like depression where heaps of rubble had collected. Ancient walls flanked the sides, carved with swirling reliefs of dragons and men in the throes of something that resembled a ritual. Daenerys paused to study the carvings. The details had been worn away by centuries of corrosive air. Yet she could still make out the shapes of men standing with arms raised, dragons overhead spewing fire. Beneath the men's feet ran lines like rivers of flame. They took careful steps into the depression, and the air grew warmer. She noticed how the ground in the center bore cracks from which a haze of heat emerged. It was as if a hidden forge lay beneath the earth. The columns around them had partially collapsed, forming what looked like a low entryway into deeper catacombs. Daenerys motioned for the Unsullied to fan out and search for any sign of a path or door that might lead them closer to the rumored nest. She suspected that if something so precious had survived, it would be buried deep, away from prying eyes, or perhaps behind collapsed stones that had remained untouched for generations. She thought of the ancient Targaryen tradition that some eggs were laid in hidden vaults as a protective measure. Stories told of how the most revered or dangerous clutches were secreted away, particularly in times of turmoil. Could it be that one such egg had remained here, undiscovered amidst the chaos of the Doom and all that followed? The notion both thrilled and terrified her. Jorah quietly approached, sweat glistening on his brow despite the gloom. "Your Grace, we've scouted the perimeter. There's an opening beneath the collapsed arches, though it looks unstable." He glanced at the scorched ground warily. "We'll need torches to see inside. Perhaps it's wise to rest first." Daenerys shook her head gently, feeling that tug of determination again. "We'll be careful, but I want to see it before we make camp. Lead the way." "Nah." He nodded, signaling two Unsullied to move ahead with lit torches. They descended carefully, stepping over fallen stones. The opening was a partially intact doorway, once flanked by pillars carved into the likeness of dragons, twisting upward. Now those dragons had missing heads and snapped tails. The air that wafted from the darkness beyond felt cool at first, then strangely warm, as if a flicker of subterranean heat rose and fell like a distant breath. Inside, the corridor sloped downward. Streams of mineral-rich water trickled along the edges, leaving behind glimmering veins of deposit. The torchlight revealed high walls of black stone, intricately carved. Though many of the carvings had melted into unrecognizable lumps, they crept forward slowly, the drip-drip of water echoing. A faint hiss of steam came from somewhere below. Daenerys moved with measured steps, her heart thrumming in her ears. A strange sense of familiarity curled through her, as though the memory of her ancestors flickered in her mind. This was a place that might have once been used for forging something far more potent than steel. She could almost taste the tang of magic in the air. An old, lingering power. They continued until the passage opened into a wide chamber. The darkness beyond their torches stretched into unseen recesses. She peered around. Half the chamber floor had collapsed, creating a pit of unknown depth. Steam rose from it in ghostly coils. On the walls, carvings of dragons soared in bas-relief. In some places, the stone bulged as if partially melted. Daenerys stepped closer to the edge, hearing a faint roar below, like the echo of water or molten rock. She felt a tremor in the floor, a slight shift, as if the place breathed. Then something flickered in the torchlight, an odd glimmer in the far corner. She turned swiftly, her eyes narrowing. There, beyond a tumble of bricks, a dark shape protruded, half buried in rubble. She took a measured breath and approached. A wave of anticipation rushed through her as she motioned for one of the Unsullied to help clear some of the debris. Jorah stood by her side, hand on the hilt of his sword, as if bracing for some unseen threat. Stone by stone, the Unsullied removed the rubble, revealing a portion of a carved dais or altar. It stood about waist high, made of obsidian or some similarly dark material. Atop it, though partially obscured by dust and fragments, lay an object that made Daenerys' heart lurch. Even in the dim light, it appeared oval and scaled, its surface glinting with a faint sheen. The color was not entirely discernible. At times it seemed black. Then, under the torch's flame, it glimmered with subtle striations of red. Her pulse hammered in her chest. She took an unsteady step forward, ignoring the cautionary murmur from Jorah. Gently, she knelt before the dais and reached out to brush the dust away. Her fingertips grazed the object's surface. It felt like cool stone, yet beneath that chill was a latent warmth, a possibility of life locked within. This was what she had come for, or at least she believed so. She had been prepared for disappointment. Yet here it lay before her. A dragon egg, ancient and mysterious. The rumored egg of Balerion? She did not dare to fully believe it, but something in her blood thrilled at the thought. Carefully, she lifted it from the dais. It was heavy, more so than the eggs that once hatched into Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. This egg was larger, the surface more intricately scaled. She turned it slowly, watching the torchlight ripple over the patterns that looked like petrified flames. With her heart pounding, she exhaled a trembling breath. She could almost swear the egg pulsed in her hands, or perhaps it was her own heartbeat echoing against the shell. Jorah was at her side, awe in his eyes. Even the Unsullied seemed momentarily transfixed. The stillness of the chamber pressed in on them all, as if the city itself held its breath. Could it really be Balerion's egg? Or was it another relic left behind by the Dragon Lords? Daenerys found it difficult to wrest her gaze away. Thoughts swirled. What if this egg was indeed from the line of the Black Dread? What powers or dangers might it hold? She reminded herself that an unhatched egg could remain lifeless forever if it had been turned to stone. But her own life had already defied such logic once. Was it possible to do so again? She pressed a palm against the shell, trying to sense any sign of latent life. Her memories of birthing dragons through fire came flooding back, the heat of flames licking her skin, the crack of eggs splitting open. She remembered the indescribable feeling when she first saw Drogon's tiny form, screeching into the night. It was as if a piece of her soul had been reborn with them. Now, this egg felt more like an artifact of an older, darker time, carrying the weight of centuries. She carefully set the egg down on the dais, unwilling to risk dropping it in her surprise or excitement. Jorah stepped forward, brow furrowed. "Your Grace, this must weigh a tremendous amount. Are we certain it's safe to take? The passages, the city. Everything here is so unpredictable. And that pit." He gestured to the collapsed floor with a worried glance. The entire chamber might be unstable. Daenerys rose slowly, letting the egg rest behind her on the dais. "We can't leave it behind," she said, voice firm. "But we also shouldn't linger here. I want to examine the dais more closely first." They turned their attention to the dais itself, brushing off more debris. Oddly, it remained largely intact compared to the rest of the chamber. The surface was etched with circles and runes that were foreign even to Daenerys' eyes, though she could guess they were some form of Valyrian glyphs. She traced the lines with a careful finger, trying to glean meaning from them. They curved in an elegant spiral that led directly to the center where the egg had rested. She wondered if the Dragon Lords had used these shapes in their rituals, harnessing the city's volcanic power. A rumble from beneath the floor interrupted her thoughts. It was low, like a giant turning in its sleep. A tremor rippled through the chamber, shaking loose a thin trickle of dust and pebbles from the ceiling. One of the Unsullied hissed in alarm, steadying himself. Daenerys grabbed the edge of the dais for balance, and Jorah clutched at her shoulder. The tremor subsided as quickly as it began, leaving an uneasy silence. Daenerys pressed her lips together, glancing at the pit. "We should leave," she said, mindful that the structure might not withstand more quakes. "We have what we came for. Let's find a safer place to make camp." Jorah nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "Agreed, Your Grace." Swiftly, Daenerys took up the egg again, bracing its weight against her torso, carefully adjusting her grip. The Unsullied formed up around her, and they made their way back the way they came. Each step was measured, the torchlight flickering against the walls. She felt the adrenaline humming in her veins, every nerve on edge. Part of her was in disbelief that this legendary relic now rested in her arms, that the rumors of Balerion's egg might be more than myth. Yet, even if it was not truly his, it was undoubtedly a piece of Valyria's past, unthinkably valuable. They emerged from the chamber, their torches illuminating the collapsed walkway. The small party retraced their steps through the corridor, back up the slope to the surface. Daenerys was mindful of each quivering stone beneath her boots. A swirl of sulfuric wind greeted them at the exit, carrying the city's stench and heat. She blinked to clear her eyes, adjusting to the dull twilight of Valyria's gloom once more. Clouds still billowed in the sky, the sun's location hidden by thick haze, though they guessed it was late afternoon by now. When they stepped outside, Daenerys noted that the temperature had risen further. The city's smoldering vents seemed more active, and the air felt prickly on her skin. She held the egg close, scanning the area for a suitable place to rest. Jorah pointed out a more intact building off to the side, where sections of the roof had caved in, but walls still stood. The Unsullied fanned out to inspect it. Daenerys took the moment to steady her breath. The egg felt heavy in her arms, as if it had a gravitational pull all its own. She thought she caught a faint sensation, like a soft thrum or vibration. It might have been her own heartbeat echoing, or an illusion conjured by her hopes. She drew her cloak around it, not wanting the swirling dust to coat its glossy scales. She could not deny the trace of fear snaking along her spine. Holding so much history and potential destruction unnerved her. The building they chose was a rectangular structure with a portion of the roof intact, enough to provide some semblance of shelter. Inside, the floor was littered with shattered masonry and broken rafters. The walls, though cracked, still stood, and there was a single doorway they could guard. She nodded to Jorah in approval, and the Unsullied began clearing debris to make room for a small fire. While they worked, Daenerys gently set the egg in a safe corner, where it would be shielded. She watched it for a moment, an odd tightness in her chest. When their makeshift camp was ready, Daenerys moved to sit on a flat piece of rubble beside the egg. She accepted a share of food from Jorah, though her appetite was scant. Instead, she found her eyes drifting again and again to that dark surface, trying to see if there was any shifting color in the scales. Was it her imagination, or did the red undertones flicker when the torchlight shifted? It was so reminiscent of her old eggs, yet grander in a somber way. Each scale was patterned like a tiny flame frozen in stone. Jorah settled beside her, his voice quiet so as not to disturb the small camp's hush. "You have it in your hands now, what you risked so much to find. How do you feel, Daenerys?" She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the myriad emotions swirl within her: excitement, dread, curiosity, a sense of destiny. "I feel," she began, pausing to find the words. "I feel as though a door has opened, one I had not even realized was there. But I also feel the weight of it. If this truly is an egg of Balerion's line, then it ties me deeper to my ancestors' power. And I wonder if that power is something I can truly master, or if it will master me. Jorah observed her gently. No one else has your bond with dragons. If anyone can handle this, it's you. He looked at the egg with cautious respect. But I understand your hesitation. The more we chase destiny, the more it seems to demand of us. She breathed out a soft sigh, her gaze distant. Sometimes I long for simpler dreams. But then I remember how many people have suffered under tyrants, how many still wait for someone to break chains, bring new hope. If my destiny leads me here, then I must walk forward, no matter how dark the path. Jorah placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity. The Unsullied had finished arranging their small perimeter. A meager fire crackled in the center of the shelter, offering minimal warmth against the city's pervasive heat. The sulfuric tang on the air made breathing a chore. Daenerys sipped from her water skin to keep her throat from drying. She noticed that the day outside was waning. Soon, Valyria would be shrouded in the inky darkness of night. She did not wish to wander after sunset. She glanced around at her small band, each man on edge yet steadfast. She felt a swell of gratitude. These men were here because they believed in her cause, or because they had pledged themselves unconditionally. None had turned back, even when faced with the haunting reputation of Valyria. She promised herself she would see them all safely out of this cursed city. They would stay the night here, and tomorrow, if fortune smiled upon them, they would begin the cautious journey back to the coast where their ship lay anchored. Her gaze flickered again to the egg. She wondered fleetingly if it might make itself known in some miraculous way. If, in the depths of night, it would tremble or glow, proving that a spark of life still resided within. Daenerys had spent enough time around dragon eggs to sense that awakening them required a convergence of faith and fire, blood and magic. She wondered if she had it in her to repeat such a ritual. The notion filled her with a cautious reverence. One day, perhaps, she would learn if this egg was truly alive. For now, it remained as it was, silent, weighty, brimming with possibilities yet locked away. The hours dragged on. Daenerys scarcely moved from her spot, though she was aware that she should probably rest before night fully claimed the sky. Instead, she found her thoughts drifting to the realm she had left behind. The battles that still needed fighting. She had come here on a quest that some might call folly. Yet here, in her arms, was proof that the dreams of Targaryens could manifest. She remembered tales of how many times her forebears had tried to hatch eggs that never warmed, and the heartbreak that followed. But there was also the memory of her own triumph. 3 eggs, 3 living dragons. She realized she was stroking the shell absent-mindedly, as one might soothe a cherished pet. She quickly withdrew her hand. A wave of fatigue settled over her. The city's oppressive heat, the tension of constant vigilance, the emotional weight of discovery, it all bore down on her. She could see that Jorah, too, wore fatigue like a heavy cloak. The Unsullied never complained, but their stoic watchfulness had an edge of weariness about it. Eventually, Daenerys mustered the resolve to turn in for the evening. They had laid out simple bedrolls, though the ground was uneven and scattered with debris. She insisted that the egg remain close by, hoping that nothing in the night would intrude upon them. She noticed that Jorah organized a watch rotation among the Unsullied, ensuring at least 2 remained awake at all times. She pulled her cloak around her as she lay down, the egg securely nestled in a corner within her reach. That subtle warmth she imagined still tugged at her senses. Night enveloped Valyria in a strange hush. No cicadas or night birds called. No gentle rustle of living creatures moving about, only the distant hiss of steam and the occasional rattle of shifting rubble. Every so often, a gout of volcanic gas would rise from some fissure, creating a glow like distant hellfire. Daenerys drifted in and out of shallow dreams, images of dragons swirling through her mind. She dreamed of Balerion's massive shadow sweeping across the world, of her own reflection in his obsidian scales, of flames that consumed entire cities. She saw the egg in her hands, cracks forming across its surface as something immense stirred within. She felt a jolt of fear. What if the creature inside was beyond her control, wreathed in the old magic that had died with Valyria? She woke, heart pounding, to the flicker of torchlight. A piece of the roof had crumbled further in her sleep, leaving fresh debris scattered on the ground. But all else was quiet. Her watchers stood vigilant. The egg remained where she left it, unmoved. She exhaled slowly, letting her pulse settle. It was still night, the shadows deep and cloying. She could not tell how much time had passed. Her body ached, her throat parched. Reaching for her water skin, she took a small sip, then made her way toward the center of the ruined room where the fire had been reduced to embers. Jorah, half awake against the wall, offered her a faint nod. "Trouble sleeping?" he murmured. She settled next to him, hugging her knees. "Strange dreams," she admitted. "I feel like this place is inside my head." He gave a slight grimace of sympathy. "No one comes here without feeling the weight of it, I think. Even the stone men carry the torment of their cursed existence." Her gaze flicked to the doorway, where two unsullied stood. Beyond them lay the labyrinth of Valyria, silent but never truly at rest. She shuddered softly. "If the city itself had eyes, I'd swear it was watching us." He said nothing, merely placing a comforting hand over hers. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the low rumble from far below. Eventually, Daenerys felt a sliver of calm settle over her. She felt the egg's presence at her back, a silent sentinel. Whatever nightmares she battled, she would face them. She was no stranger to fear. Fear was a companion on the road to conquest and liberation alike. An indeterminate time later, she drifted back to her makeshift bed and slid into a restless sleep. The night wore on. Now and then, a soft tremor would ripple through the ruins, causing fragments of stone to shift and dust to swirl. The watchers maintained their posts. Daenerys' mind swam with images of dragons and the long-lost spires of a golden city, free of ash. In her dream, she saw dragons roosting on the highest towers, their roars echoing in a city alive with wonder. She saw the people, proud and robed in shimmering fabrics, forging steel in dragonfire, chanting incantations that shaped the world. The dream city was luminous, invincible. Then, in a blink, the ground opened, molten fury surged up, towers toppled, and screams filled the air. Fire rained from the heavens, and the dream fractured, consumed by darkness. She awoke with a gasp, the world still. Her heart thudded. For a moment, she expected to see flames, but all she found was the remnants of night in that broken building. A gray hint of dawn light threaded through the cracks of the roof. She exhaled, her trembling easing. At her side, Jorah stirred awake, blinking. She managed a thin smile. "Another dream," she explained softly. Though he did not ask, he nodded wearily, sitting upright. "Dawn's coming. We can leave soon." She glanced toward the egg. It remained silent, motionless. Any sign of hope or life was contained entirely in her imagination. Yet it was enough to instill purpose in her. She rose and gently lifted it, cradling it against her chest as she stretched her stiff limbs. Outside, the gloom of Valyria persisted, but at least the day's meager light revealed the paths ahead. The group ate a quick, joyless meal, gathered their supplies, and prepared to retrace their way out of the city. Every man seemed relieved to be heading for the outskirts, to the boat that waited to ferry them back. As they set off through the labyrinth of ashen streets, the egg nestled firmly in Daenerys' arms. She found her mind a tumult of questions about what she carried. Perhaps it was not Balerion's egg, but some lesser drake's. Perhaps it was fully petrified, a lifeless relic. Yet perhaps, too, it was something more, a heart of living flame that had waited centuries for the right moment to awaken. She looked up at the jagged silhouettes of broken spires and silent arches. The city offered no answers, only the muted echo of their footsteps. They would not escape Valyria's grasp so easily, she knew. The journey out would be fraught with danger, the unpredictable nature of the ruins, the possibility of stumbling upon half-mad stone men, the threat of further tremors. And beyond that lay the open question: what if the waters themselves would not allow them safe passage? Yet Daenerys refused to yield to doubt. She was the blood of the dragon, and in her arms, she held the legacy of an empire that had once ruled the skies. If she could claim this old promise and raise a new dragon, perhaps it would stand as a testament that the Targaryen line still had a role to play in shaping the world. So she walked forward, shoulders squared, gripping the egg as if it were the most precious treasure imaginable. Inwardly, she vowed that if it needed flame to awaken, she would give it. If it needed blood, she would offer her own. She would do so carefully, wisely, mindful of the cost. But that was the path of a dragon. It always had been. And thus Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, carried the rumored egg of Balerion, the black dread, through the cursed ruins of Valyria, every step a testament to her resolve and her heritage, unaware of the trials that lay ahead, but steadfast in her conviction that if anyone could shepherd such a relic back into the light, it was she. Even the broken city seemed to watch her go in silence, as though holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. They had grown accustomed to the uneasy silence that wreathed Valyria like a death shroud. Yet each step away from that crumbling shelter felt like 1,000. Daenerys led them carefully along the shattered thoroughfare, the dragon egg in her arms, a reminder of why they had ventured into this cursed place. Jorah walked beside her with quiet diligence, ever watchful, and the Unsullied fanned out, trying not to stray too close to the fissures that belched steam, or the precarious debris that could collapse in an instant. Though dawn's weak light filtered through the smoky sky, the ruins remained caught in that perpetual half-darkness. Every echo of their boots on loose stone reverberated. From time to time, something clattered far off, a piece of rubble falling, or perhaps a footstep of a creature lurking out of sight. Daenerys pressed the egg against her breast, feeling its weight. It seemed heavier than it had been the night before, or perhaps that was just her fatigue. Still, she pushed onward, scanning the road ahead. Sulfuric clouds drifted across their path, forcing them to shield their faces with scraps of cloth. Even the Unsullied, stoic as they were, squinted as their eyes watered. She paused at the remains of a grand archway, now half buried in fallen masonry. The arch itself retained only one side, a tall, narrow portion of intricately worked stone, carved with serpentine dragons twisting in patterns that told stories older than memory. Beyond it, the path forked, one route leading downward through a collapsed colonnade, the other winding upward to the remnants of what might have been a public courtyard. She willed herself to remember the route they had taken the previous day, but Valyria had a way of confounding even the clearest recollection. She glanced at Jorah. He studied the forks, his brow knit with concern. "My sense is that we came from below, but this place deceives the eye. The labyrinth changes when we're not looking." Daenerys exhaled, her breath catching on the sulfur in the air. "We do not have time to make a mistake. We need to return to the boat." Jorah nodded. "Agreed, Your Grace. Perhaps I can scout a bit ahead while the Unsullied maintain a perimeter?" She did not like splitting their numbers, but recognized that time was pressing. The roiling fumes overhead hinted at fresh volcanic activity. Even the ground felt warmer, more restless, as if the city's buried fires were closer to the surface. "Go," she said, her voice hushed but resolute. "But stay in sight if you can. If the path is too treacherous, come back at once." He signaled a pair of Unsullied to follow him, and set off down the lower passage. Daenerys remained by the arch, standing in the partial shade cast by its leaning stones, holding the egg. The other Unsullied stood near her, spears at the ready. She let her free hand drift to the carved dragons that spiraled around the broken archway, feeling the chipped edges, imagining what it had once looked like. Smooth, polished stone swirling with images of flight and fire. She couldn't help but recall how proud her ancestors had been, raising this city as a testament to their mastery over dragons. She wondered if they had ever anticipated the doom, or if they believed themselves invincible, until the moment it all went wrong. A strange hush gathered around them. She strained her ears, hearing only the soft shift of ash underfoot, the drip of water from distant cracks, the hiss of steam. A frown creased her brow. Something felt off. Then, from around a half-toppled pillar, a flicker of movement caught her eye. One of the Unsullied tensed, raising his spear. Daenerys' pulse quickened. She peered into the haze, seeing a shape that hunched and swayed, not quite steady on its feet. Its outline was that of a man, or what had once been a man. The figure staggered forward, arms twitching in odd angles. Skin glistened gray and cracked, marred by lumps and ridges reminiscent of decaying stone. As it came into clearer view, she saw its face, a mask of frozen agony, lips peeled back from blackened gums. The eyes were glassy and unseeing, yet it moved toward them with a kind of slow, determined shuffle. A stone man, afflicted by the advanced stages of grayscale. Daenerys swallowed the surge of revulsion. She had heard the stories of those exiled to the ruins of old Valyria, mad and contagious, lost to the disease that calcified their flesh. One bite, one scratch could doom a healthy person to that same affliction. The stone man emitted a breathy rasp that might have been a voice, reaching out with clawed gray fingers. It was not alone. Another shape loomed behind it, then another, emerging from behind fractured walls, from some hidden nook in the rubble. Their motions were jerky, uncoordinated, yet they advanced as a group. "Form up," Daenerys ordered quietly, her voice almost catching on the dryness in her throat. The Unsullied stepped forward without hesitation, forming a loose semicircle around her. She felt her heartbeat pounding against her ribs, the egg tight in her arms. From the corner of her eye, she saw that Jorah and his scouting party had noticed the commotion. They were still some distance away, but he was already calling to the Unsullied, urging them to regroup. The stone men, 4 in total, approached with an almost uncanny slowness, as though plagued by half-forgotten echoes in their minds. Their once human faces were stiff with disease, their limbs contorted. One, with twisted stumps for hands, let out a wet gargle that might have been a moan. Another lurched forward more quickly, a black tongue protruding from cracked lips. The Unsullied did not move to attack outright. They were well trained in sword and spear, but they knew the danger of contact. Daenerys realized with alarm that any attempt to strike them down in close quarters could risk contamination. Yet the stone men kept coming, their desire to reach living flesh evident in their tortured posture. The forwardmost figure tried to lunge at an Unsullied shield, scraping its ruined hands across the metal. The Unsullied shoved it back, refusing to let it too close. The push made the figure reel, but it did not fall. Instead, it regrouped, making a plaintive, hollow rasp. Dot! Another staggered in from the side, aiming to slip past the spears. Daenerys held her breath. She had seen men with grayscale before, children of lesser lords, beggars in the outskirts of the city, but never had she encountered these advanced, madness-stricken forms that haunted Valyria. She did not want a pitched battle, yet nor could she let them close. She nodded sharply to the Unsullied. "We need to drive them away without letting them touch us," she said. "Use your spears, keep them at a distance." They obeyed. 2 Unsullied advanced, thrusting carefully at one of the stone men's legs, trying to wound it enough to halt its approach without risking splatter or direct contact. Their discipline was extraordinary, each movement measured. The diseased figure gave a garbled howl, stumbling backward as blood, thick and dark, oozed from the puncture. Still, it kept moving, even as its leg buckled. The other stone men lurched forward, as though spurred by the scent of blood. Jorah arrived then, sword drawn, the 2 Unsullied from his scouting party flanking him. He assessed the situation quickly, voice tight. "Stone men, we have to get past them, or risk being surrounded. There could be more." Daenerys nodded, her voice urgent. "We push through. No heroics. I won't lose any of you here. Me." With that, the Unsullied shifted formation, their shields locked, to force the diseased creatures aside. One stone man, more spry than the rest, tried to scramble around the edge, clawing at the shield. Another lunged at an Unsullied's back, but was met by a precise spear thrust that drove it away. They hissed and moaned, uncoordinated, but desperate. In a quick maneuver, 2 Unsullied slammed their shields forward, toppling the stone men into one another. The gray forms collapsed in a heap of writhing limbs. Daenerys seized the moment. Egg in hand, she pressed forward behind the shield wall, feeling the rank stench of decay in her nostrils. The stone men wailed and gnashed their teeth, but the Unsullied advanced steadily, no gaps in their defense. All the while, Jorah stood near her, sword angled carefully, prepared to strike if any of them broke through. She was keenly aware that a single mistake could cost them dearly. They succeeded in forcing a path. Step by step, they herded the stone men back, then maneuvered around them, pushing toward the upward slope that beckoned like a faint promise of escape. The diseased creatures reached out blindly, scratching at the dirt. One tried to cling to an unsullied's leg, but it was kicked aside with brutal efficiency. Daenerys averted her gaze. She felt pity and horror in equal measure at the sight, but survival was paramount. Once they had sufficient distance, she ordered a halt. The stone men, disoriented, milled in confusion, eventually staggering after them at a slow, uneven pace. But the group had pulled too far ahead for the diseased wretches to catch them now. The hideous moans receded into the echoes of the city's gloom. Still, Daenerys felt her skin crawl with dread. So that was one of the perils Valyria yet harbored, living vestiges of the city's calamity. She shared a weighted glance with Jorah, who nodded grimly. They climbed over the fractured remains of a grand staircase littered with rubble, ignoring the mosaic tile fragments that depicted dancing dragons. Though each shard hinted at old splendors, they had little time to admire them. The air grew thicker with volcanic fumes, forcing them to take shallow breaths and press cloth to their faces. The ground underfoot crumbled in places, revealing pockets of trapped steam that hissed upward. Twice, a minor tremor caused the broken steps to shudder, sending a cascade of gravel tumbling down the slope. Daenerys clutched the egg even tighter, pressing it against her chest so it would not slip. When they reached a plateau where the broken stair opened onto a wide terrace, they paused to get their bearings. Jorah and the Unsullied scouted the edges, peering through swirling clouds of dust and steam. A waist-high wall ran along part of the terrace, but sections had collapsed, opening to a dizzying view of the city below. Daenerys stepped carefully to the edge, mindful of the cracking stone. Valyria spread out beneath them like an endless field of shattered towers and leaning columns, steaming fissures and blackened waterways that wound through the rubble. She recognized not a single landmark. The entire place looked like a burnt-out maze with no logical plan. She felt a thread of discouragement wind around her heart. This cursed city was so vast, so fraught with danger, and they were but a handful of souls trying to escape. But she could not let despair take hold. She closed her eyes, thinking of her dragons, Drogon, Regal, Viserion, and all she had accomplished with them. She thought of how she had faced hopeless odds before, in far-off deserts and savage war zones, and emerged stronger. Valyria would test her, but she would not succumb to fear. Jorah's voice broke through her reverie. "I see a pathway that heads north by northeast," he said, joining her by the terrace wall. "It descends. If I'm not mistaken, that general direction leads us closer to the shore we departed from. I wish we had a clearer vantage, but it's worth a try. The alternative is to search for another route, and we might get turned around." Nin. She gazed out at the swirling haze. The area Jorah indicated looked like a wide avenue that sloped downward, though debris and fissures cut across it like scars. She recalled that their ship was anchored somewhere to the north. "We'll follow your instincts," she said, trusting his experience as both a warrior and a traveler. "We must keep moving, away from these fumes and from the stone men." They made their way across the terrace, then descended a battered slope littered with broken cobblestones and the toppled torsos of old statues. Once, these statues might have stood upright, depicting regal lords or dragon riders whose names were lost to time. Now, they were scattered like broken idols, half buried in volcanic ash. The group advanced slowly, spears and swords at the ready, ears pricked for any sound of pursuit. The clang of armor and the scuff of boots were the only noises that broke the hush. Daenerys' arms ached from cradling the egg, but she refused to let anyone else carry it. The very idea felt sacrilegious. This relic of her ancestors called to something in her blood, and though it was a burden, it was hers alone to bear. She occasionally glanced down, expecting to see some shift in the scales, some sign of stirring life, but the egg remained impassive, as though slumbering. At last they reached a wider avenue reminiscent of a processional road. The broken columns that lined it suggested it might have been important once, perhaps used for parades or festivals in the city's golden era. Sooty statues of dragons perched atop plinths, many missing wings or heads. The pillars between them had collapsed at angles, forming a near-constant hazard of looming stone. Here and there, molten rock had once flowed across the street, cooled into black glass that glimmered under the weak daylight. Daenerys signaled for a short break. They gathered beneath a fractured canopy of stone that offered some respite from the drifting fumes. She took the opportunity to drink water, forcing herself to consume enough despite the acrid taste the city's air left in her mouth. The Unsullied arranged themselves in a protective ring while Jorah studied the surroundings. "We'll keep to the left side of the avenue," he murmured. "That lane is narrower but seems less clogged by rubble." She nodded, tipping her head back to look at the sky. The haze overhead seemed thinner here, allowing a wan, filtered sunlight to poke through. For a moment, she almost believed they were on the right path. Some intuitive sense told her they were closer to the coast. One more day of travel perhaps, and they might see the seas shimmer. She brushed sweat from her brow, wiping the sleeve of her cloak across her face. The cloak itself was streaked with ash and dust, its original color nearly indistinguishable. They resumed their march, hugging the left flank of the wide avenue. Loose gravel and chunks of masonry crunched underfoot. Now and then, they came across a section of ground that had buckled in the doom, rising up like a wave. They scrambled over it with caution, mindful of potential sinkholes or hidden vents. Daenerys found a grim kind of rhythm in the journey, eyes scanning for threats, lungs taking short, shallow breaths. The egg gripped tight, step by step. The hours bled together. As they pressed on, the temperature seemed to fluctuate, sometimes spiking with bursts of heat from nearby fissures, sometimes easing just enough for them to catch a cooler breath of air. Jorah checked on Daenerys frequently, though he never voiced the worry she could see in his eyes. She was grateful for his loyalty, for the calm presence he brought to these ruins. Occasionally, they glimpsed more figures in the distance, though whether they were stone men or illusions conjured by shifting shadows, Daenerys could not be certain. The group did not investigate, instead forging ahead at the best pace they could manage. More than once, they had to backtrack around a collapsed tower that blocked their way, or skirt a steaming crevasse wide enough to swallow several men. Each detour frayed their nerves, but they persevered. At midday, or what felt like midday, they paused to rest in the partial shelter of a ruined temple. The building's front had collapsed, but part of the back remained standing, including a wide alcove adorned with statues of stoic faces whose features were ravaged by time. Thin rays of light slipped through the collapsed roof. The walls were black with soot, cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Daenerys settled on a stone slab that might have been an altar, setting the egg beside her while she took another meager meal of dried bread and sips of water. Jorah joined her, lowering himself onto a chunk of rubble. He wiped sweat from his brow with a stained kerchief. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the hush of the temple's remains. "We're making progress, though slower than I'd like. How are you holding up?" She flexed her shoulders, sore from the unrelenting burden of the egg. "I'm tired," she admitted. "But I've come too far to yield to exhaustion now." He nodded sympathetically. "That egg, any sign of life?" Her gaze flicked to it. In the muted light, it looked as dark and foreboding as ever. A curve of black scales banded with subtle reds. She ran her hand along its cool surface. "I can't say. Sometimes I think I feel a thrum. Other times it seems entirely dormant. I can't tell if it's alive or a relic." Jorah's voice was gentle. "You'll know in time, I suppose. You knew with Drogon's egg once upon a time?" She gave a faint smile, though sadness tinged it. Memories of those earlier days were bright in her mind, a mixture of wonder and heartbreak. "I felt a calling then. I sense a faint echo now, but it could be my own imagination." "No." He said nothing more, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She noticed how the torch of an Unsullied flickered across the statues in the alcove, revealing their stylized faces etched in relief. Some appeared serene, others wore expressions of triumph or perhaps fury. It was hard to read in the half-destroyed stone. She wondered if they were deities of Valyria or revered ancestors. She felt a pang of uncanny familiarity, as though somewhere in her blood, she recognized them. Their respite was brief. Soon, they resumed the journey, stepping back out into the furnace-like air. The temple behind them receded into the gloom. The path continued downward, snaking between partially intact buildings that bore mosaic floors visible through missing walls. Now and then, Daenerys glimpsed shapes flitting at the edges of her vision. Perhaps stone men, perhaps illusions. She kept her attention forward, focusing on the horizon, or where the horizon would be if the haze cleared. At last, late in the afternoon, they came upon a sweeping view of what once might have been a waterway leading into the city. The broken remains of a massive bridge spanned a channel of stagnant water choked by ash and debris. Their route ended at the water's edge, where ancient stones crumbled into brackish shallows. On the far side, the land jutted toward the sea. Daenerys spotted the top of a tower that appeared more intact than many they had passed, rising beyond the destroyed bridge. If the boat was anchored anywhere near, it might be in that direction. Yet the bridge was impassable. Huge segments had collapsed, leaving gaping holes that plunged into dark water swirling with who knew what toxins. The arches overhead were cracked open to the sky. A few battered columns rose like broken teeth, offering no feasible crossing. Jorah and the Unsullied exchanged grim looks. Daenerys peered around, seeing if there was any route to the left or right. The banks were a mess of jagged masonry, knee-deep mud, and uncertain drop-offs. She considered if they might attempt a detour around the collapsed structure. But the channel was wide, and it seemed to vanish into a labyrinth of partially submerged ruins. To go around might cost them days. Jorah surveyed the water's edge, frowning at the thick sludge and the swirling currents. A boat or a raft would be ideal, but I doubt we'd find anything seaworthy here. He scowled. We could try wading across where it's shallow, but there's no telling if the bottom will give way. These waters might be infected with more than just ash. And the heat, we could burn our skin if the water's scalding. Daenerys weighed their options. The sky overhead grumbled, threatening some kind of storm or fresh volcanic upheaval. She could almost taste the change in the air, danger looming. I don't fancy spending another night out in the open, she said softly, a hint of urgency in her voice. We have to find a path forward. We cannot wander in circles. She paced the shoreline carefully, the Unsullied following. The egg pressed against her side served as a stark reminder of why she had to persevere. Across the water, the broken arches of the bridge beckoned like mocking fingers, offering no safe crossing. After several minutes of searching, they discovered a narrower point where chunks of fallen stone from the broken bridge created a makeshift series of steps across the channel. Large blocks jutted above the water, forming a precarious causeway. Jorah crouched at the water's edge, pressing a gloved hand to the surface. He winced. It's hot, but not boiling. There may be pockets of scalding heat, though. He lifted his hand, shaking off the droplets. If we move quickly across the stones, we might make it. But if any of us slips... He trailed off. No one needed the reminder of what awaited if they fell. Daenerys touched the egg, feeling a surge of determination. We attempt it, carefully. The Unsullied will go first, testing each stepping stone. If any are unstable, we back off. The Unsullied did not hesitate. The first man stepped onto the nearest slab of collapsed masonry. It held firm. He inched forward, sliding 1 foot ahead to probe for cracks. The block wobbled but stayed in place. Another Unsullied followed, forming a line across the stepping stones. Daenerys and Jorah watched from the bank, hearts in their throats each time a stone shifted or tilted. Steam rose around the blocks, forming a ghostly veil. Progress was slow, each man bracing himself against the occasional sway of the unstable path. At times, the water lapped over the edges, forcing them to pull back or adjust. Daenerys bit her lip, carefully judging where to step. The second Unsullied set foot on a large piece of rubble that abruptly sank a fraction deeper with a grinding noise. He froze, adjusting his weight until the stone steadied, then beckoned for Daenerys to follow. She nodded at Jorah, who offered a soft grunt of encouragement. Holding the egg under one arm, she stepped onto the first block. It was slick with algae and bits of ash. She tested her footing, knees bent, arms out for balance. She took a breath. Another step. The stone trembled beneath her. She forced herself not to look at the water below, which swirled with an oily sheen. If she slipped and fell in, weighed down by her leathers and cloak, it would be no easy feat to climb out, especially not while protecting the egg. Jorah followed, pressing close to her side in case she needed support. The line of Unsullied advanced, each man carefully choosing his path. The crossing was perhaps 30 paces wide, but it felt like miles. Halfway across, the water shimmered with heat, and steam enveloped them in a suffocating embrace. Daenerys coughed, her eyes stinging. She gritted her teeth, continuing step by step. Her heart pounded. She clung to the egg, feeling sweat bead across her forehead. A sudden shift in the stone beneath her foot startled her. She gasped as it tilted. She teetered, arms flailing for balance. The egg pressed dangerously into her ribs. Jorah reached out, steadying her by the elbow. The stone ground deeper into the watery sludge, submerging Daenerys's boot to the ankle. She felt the water's stinging heat through the leather, but it was not scalding enough to burn through. Quickly, she regained her balance, nodding her thanks to Jorah, who did not let go until he was certain she was stable. Step by step, they continued. When the first Unsullied reached the far side, he climbed onto a shattered ledge and turned, standing guard with his spear. Another joined him. One by one, the rest made it across, until only Daenerys and Jorah remained on the precarious stepping stones. She forced herself to steady her breathing, ignoring the roiling fear in her gut. This was no worse than crossing the Dothraki Sea, she told herself, or stepping into a pyre. The illusions of memory and determination only partly soothed her. At last, she gripped the final stone and climbed onto the broken ledge. Jorah followed, and the two of them collapsed onto the rubble with a gasp of relief. Her boots were soaked, her calves coated in sludge that steamed faintly in the open air. But she had not fallen. She still had the egg. She exhaled, grateful beyond words. Once they had all taken a moment to recover, they moved away from the shore. The vantage here was different. The battered causeway behind them gave way to a road that climbed slightly, winding between tall, half-ruined walls. A cool draft of wind, though tinged with sulfur, brushed Daenerys' cheeks. She welcomed it, imagining that perhaps they were closer to the coastline, closer to freedom. They followed the road, picking a path through fallen bricks and metal reinforcements twisted by ancient fires. Though the place was still desolate, Daenerys noticed subtle changes. The ground was less thoroughly cracked, and she caught glimpses of the sky where the haze seemed thinner. The smell of brine mingled with the acrid odor of volcanoes. She closed her eyes briefly and inhaled. That was the sea. She was sure of it. Their relief was short-lived. Ahead, the walls curved inward, forming a narrow passage. The remnants of buildings loomed overhead, bridging across the street in half-collapsed arcs. She could see daylight at the far end, but the space between was like a dim tunnel of rubble. Jorah hesitated, glancing back. "We might try to go around," he offered. "This looks risky." She peered at the passage. It was cramped, partially blocked by heaps of collapsed stone. Daylight flickered in a patchy glow near the far exit. "Around might take hours," she pointed out. "The day is already wearing on, and the further we stray, the more we risk losing our sense of direction." Reluctantly, he inclined his head, conceding her point. "Then we go forward carefully." The Unsullied filed in, picking their way over the debris. Daenerys followed, the egg still clutched tight. The gloom of the tunnel enclosed them. In some places, the wreckage overhead formed a jagged roof. In others, the sky broke through in beams of dusty light. She found herself stepping over rusted bits of metal, broken pottery, ancient bones that might have belonged to animals or humans. It was impossible to tell. Her ears caught the soft trickle of water dripping from overhead, each drop echoing in the hush. Then she heard another sound, faint like a whisper. She froze, signaling the Unsullied to halt. They paused mid-step, spears raised. Jorah drew his sword in silence. Daenerys listened, heart pounding. The noise came again, a raspy murmur that might have been wind, but it felt too controlled, too deliberate. She motioned to the Unsullied at the front to proceed slowly. They rounded a bend, where a collapsed beam forced them to stoop low. There, beyond the curve, she saw the shapes of people huddled by a portion of wall that still stood. Their silhouettes were indistinct in the dimness, and for a moment, Daenerys' mind leapt to the stone men. But these figures seemed different. Alert. Armed. As soon as they caught sight of Daenerys' group, they sprang to their feet. Daenerys stopped, narrowing her eyes. One of the strangers stepped forward into a patch of light, revealing a bearded man with a haggard face, clad in tattered leathers. He held a sword, rusty but threatening enough in these close quarters. Another figure, a woman with a ragged cloak and a scar across her cheek, leveled a crossbow. The bearded man spoke in a harsh voice. "You're not stone men, but you are still trespassing in our territory. State your business." Yora stepped protectively in front of Daenerys, sword at the ready. "We don't intend to linger," he said. "We're just passing through, returning to the coast." The man barked a short, humorless laugh. "Returning to the coast? You're braver than most, or dumber. These ruins kill everyone eventually." Daenerys stepped forward, carefully keeping her cloak around the egg. She eyed the crossbow, the set of the man's shoulders. They looked like scavengers or possibly smugglers who used Valyria's dread as cover for their illicit work. "We mean no harm," she said firmly. "We have no desire to fight." A flicker of curiosity passed over the scarred woman's face. She shifted her crossbow, her gaze traveling over Daenerys' features, then flicking to the Unsullied's disciplined ranks. "You come with an army," she said warily. "Yet you say you mean no harm." Daenerys met her gaze. "They are my guard. I won't hide that. But our only goal is to find our way out of these ruins. If you help us, we'll reward you." At that, the man gave another rasping chuckle. "Reward us with what? Coins? Food? Coin does little good here." Jorah lifted his chin. "We have provisions. Water, dried rations, enough to share if you guide us safely." A tense silence fell. Daenerys could see the hunger etched on the strangers' faces, the dryness of their lips, the tremble in their stance. Living here must be akin to a slow death. She wondered how many of them there were in total, how they survived among the city's toxic vents and stone men. She sensed desperation in them, a feral edge. That made them dangerous. The crossbow woman considered them for a moment longer, then lowered her weapon fractionally, but not fully. "We know these passages," she said, her voice rough. "We can lead you out if you truly have supplies worth the risk." The bearded man spat on the ground. "Or we could kill you and take your supplies." His tone was casual, but Daenerys felt her stomach twist. One of the Unsullied bristled, spear angled forward. Daenerys lifted her hand, signaling restraint. She recognized a standoff. If these scavengers tried anything, the Unsullied would dispatch them quickly. But it might not be bloodless, and it would risk drawing more unwanted attention. She wanted to avoid a fight. Quietly, she pulled a small pouch from her belt and tossed it forward, letting it land at the man's feet. He eyed her warily, then bent to open it, revealing a few carefully wrapped pieces of dried meat and a sealed skin of water. The woman with the crossbow looked on, biting her lip at the sight of fresh water. "You can have more if we get out of here," Daenerys said. "Enough to last you for a time, if you help us reach the coast safely. Or, if you prefer to threaten us, you'll likely be cut down before you can raise that crossbow again." Her tone was calm, measured, neither boastful nor apologetic. The man scowled, clearly weighing his options. His eyes flicked to the Unsullied, whose rigid composure and silent threat were unmistakable. Slowly he nodded. "We know a route. Might be blocked, might not. This city changes, but we'll show you." Daenerys inclined her head. "Agreed. What are your names?" The man's scowl deepened, as though the question offended him. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "I'm Garen. She's Alice." "Daenerys." Daenerys offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "Very well, Garen, Alice. Lead on." Their small band merged, though neither side fully trusted the other. Garen and Alice whistled, calling forth two more companions from the shadows, thin, hollow-eyed youths who clutched makeshift clubs. They eyed the Unsullied nervously, then fell in line behind Garen, as though he were their leader. Daenerys and Jorah stayed near the middle, the egg concealed beneath Daenerys' cloak. She feared that if these scavengers realized its potential worth, they might attempt something desperate. Alys took the lead, winding through the half-collapsed passage. She explained in clipped phrases how certain routes were blocked by fresh collapses, how they'd scavenged a safer path in recent months. Jorah listened intently, occasionally glancing back at Daenerys to confirm she was faring well. Soon, they emerged from the dark corridor into an open area, where two tall buildings had once faced each other across a courtyard. The courtyard was filled with a jumble of rubble that rose to nearly the second-story windows. Alys and Garon navigated the debris with practiced steps, occasionally indicating a stable foothold or cautioning about a loose block. Daenerys followed carefully, her arms straining with the egg's weight. At length, they reached the far side, where a cramped alley waited. Daenerys could smell the tang of salt air more strongly now, which quickened her pulse. Garon grunted as he peered around a corner. "Usually, we pass through here," he muttered, "but the ground's caved in further. We'll have to climb up to the second floor and cross." "Nan," he pointed at a shaky wooden scaffold they must have erected themselves, lashed together from scraps of timber. It led up the side of the ruined building, connecting to a precarious ledge. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Jorah. This was far from reassuring, but what choice did they have? One by one, they ascended the creaking scaffold. It swayed alarmingly under the weight of the Unsullied's armor, but they moved with disciplined care, distributing themselves so as not to overload any section. When Daenerys climbed, she forced herself not to look down at the yawning chasm of rubble below. Her arms ached fiercely, but she would not relinquish the egg. Step by step, her boots found the narrow rungs, until at last she hauled herself onto the ledge. Garon waited there, looking impatient. Aes and the two younger scavengers stood a few paces away, shifting anxiously from foot to foot. Ahead lay a battered walkway, across what had once been the second floor of the building, now open to the sky. Broken masonry formed a kind of bridge to the adjacent structure. The drop below was enough to kill anyone who slipped. "This way," Garon said curtly, stepping forward. The debris underfoot was uneven, forcing them to watch every movement. The Unsullied came up in pairs, careful not to overburden any single section of the collapsed floor. Rocks tumbled occasionally, clattering down the gaps. Dust rose in choking clouds. Daenerys moved slowly, placing one foot before the other. Her shoulders throbbed. She felt Jorah close behind, ready to catch her if she stumbled. The air up here was marginally clearer. A faint breeze ruffled her silver-white hair, bringing with it the undeniable aroma of salt. It rejuvenated her for a moment, giving her hope that they were truly nearing the coast. Then, without warning, a tremor rippled through the building. It was subtle at first, a low rumbling that made the cracked walls quiver. Dust rained from overhead. A chunk of stone from an upper story broke free, crashing down near them with a roar. The entire walkway lurched. Daenerys froze, feeling her stomach twist in fear. She clutched at a jagged piece of wall, pressing the egg to her side. "Move, move," Jorah shouted, urgency raw in his voice. The Unsullied at the front picked up their pace, crossing to the sturdier portion of the adjacent building. Alys grabbed hold of Garon to keep from toppling over. Another tremor followed, stronger than the first, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the floor. Daenerys forced herself to dash forward, ignoring the spikes of pain in her ankles as the shifting debris shifted under her weight. Jorah stayed beside her. A gap opened in the floor just behind them, a gaping maw of emptiness. She heard a terrified yelp from one of the younger scavengers. They scrambled, fear lending them speed. She nearly lost her balance when the walkway buckled, tilting sharply to one side. The egg threatened to slip from her grasp. She tightened her hold, staggering. Jorah grabbed her arm, pulling her up as she teetered on the brink. Distantly, she heard Garon cursing. A portion of the walkway behind them collapsed with a thunderous groan, sending rubble crashing down into the courtyard below. Somehow, they reached the relative stability of the adjacent building's floor. The tremor subsided. Everyone stood gasping, hearts pounding. Dust coated their hair and clothes. A portion of the walkway they had just crossed was gone entirely. Had they been a moment slower, they would have plummeted into the wreckage below. The second floor was not exactly secure, but it appeared less likely to collapse outright. Garen pointed to a set of half-intact stairs leading down. "That'll take us to street level on the other side. Then it's not far to the outskirts." His chest rose and fell with each ragged breath. The younger scavengers stared at him, their faces pale. Daenerys could see fear in their eyes, but also the iron determination that came from surviving in this forsaken place. She nodded, brushing dust from her cloak. Jorah steadied her, then let his hand fall away. They descended the crooked stairs, ducking under a broken beam that swung precariously. The steps were caked with ash, some entirely missing, forcing them to jump from one platform to another. At one point, they had to climb over a partially collapsed segment of wall to reach the final flight. Yet eventually, they arrived back on solid ground, or as solid as Valyria's shifting terrain allowed. The day was wearing on. The light, such as it was, had taken on the golden tinge that preceded dusk. Daenerys dreaded another night in the open, but each step forward might bring them closer to the ship. Her limbs trembled from fatigue, yet she kept going, compelled by the knowledge that soon, if luck was with them, they would leave this damned city behind. They pressed on through the ruined streets. Garen and allies guided them along a route that skirted massive fissures and steaming cracks. They paused occasionally to let out short whistles or calls, apparently signals to any of their companions lurking in the rubble, warning them to stay back or not to attack. Their uneasy alliance held, bolstered by the promise of supplies. Eventually, they reached a vantage point high enough to glimpse the sea beyond a cluster of low, ruined buildings. Gray waves churned under a sallow sky, distant but gloriously open. Daenerys felt an almost overwhelming rush of relief at the sight. Another hour of careful navigation, and they might emerge onto the beaches. She could almost taste freedom. Garen did not share her excitement. His jaw tightened at the view, as though the ocean were an unwelcome presence. She wondered if he feared leaving Valyria, or if he believed the outside world held no place for him now. Still, he kept his end of the bargain. They descended another winding street, passing what might have once been a grand amphitheater. Now it was just a crater of toppled stone and broken arches. They were close, so close. Daenerys could sense the sea air, cool and invigorating, whisking away some of the city's sulfurous heat. The ground here was more stable, though the city's gloom lingered. At last, they came upon a narrow lane that ended at a small portico, overlooking the water. The remains of a shattered pier jutted from the shore. Beyond it, if they looked carefully through the haze, they could see the faint outline of their ship, anchored at a distance, sails furled. A wave of gratitude washed through Daenerys so profound that she almost smiled. They had made it. She whispered something akin to a prayer under her breath. The Unsullied stepped forward, scanning the area for threats. Garen and allies hovered at the edge, uncertain. Daenerys turned to them, loosening the waterskin at her hip. "You kept your word, so I'll keep mine." She handed over a larger share of provisions, dried fruit, salted meat, and fresh water. The scavengers snatched them up hungrily, eyes gleaming. Aelys, her crossbow slung over her back, tore into the dried fruit with a ravenous urgency. The younger scavengers practically fell on the waterskin. Jorah watched them warily, but Garen merely nodded in rough gratitude. "Never seen men like yours," he said, glancing at the Unsullied. "They fear nothing." "They are unsullied," Daenerys said. "They do not fear, and you'd do well to let us go now, or you will see their skill up close." He grunted. "No need for threats. You've paid us. Get your ship and leave." Daenerys nodded, then paused, considering them one last time. Could she offer them more? A path out of Valyria? Or would they refuse it, bound to whatever half-life they'd carved here? Before she could speak, Garen turned away, leading his group back among the ruins, content with the supplies. Aelys lingered a moment, meeting Daenerys' eyes, as though searching for something. Then she, too, melted into the haze. Daenerys let them go. She could not rescue everyone. She could barely rescue herself. She turned to Jorah and the Unsullied. "We've come this far. Now, Let us be on our way." The path to the water was choked with debris, but not impassable. Carefully, they descended to the shore where black sand met the waves. The stench of sulfur was less pervasive here, replaced by the pungent salt of the sea. Daenerys gazed across the water. Their ship's silhouette seemed blessedly real, not some illusion. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Soon, she would be aboard that vessel, sailing away from Valyria's haunted spires. And in her arms, the egg of a dragon that once might have grown to shadow the world. They hailed the ship with signals of torchlight, indicating their location. After some anxious waiting, a rowboat emerged from the murk, manned by 2 oarsmen who recognized Daenerys' retinue. Relief poured from them as they beheld their queen alive. The vessel bumped gently against the shallows, and the Unsullied formed a perimeter, guiding Daenerys to the boat. One by one, they climbed aboard. Jorah settled beside her, his exhaustion evident in the lines etched on his face. As the oarsmen pulled away from shore, Daenerys looked back at Valyria's massive silhouette, the city's broken spires shrinking as they drifted farther into the water. The haze hung over it still, a permanent stain on the horizon. She knew that, in all likelihood, she would never see it again. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Sorrow for what was lost, relief to have escaped, and a lingering sense that she carried a piece of it with her now in the form of that ancient egg. When they reached the ship, she ascended the rope ladder with careful, deliberate motions. Her arms and legs trembled with fatigue. The egg felt like a millstone pressed against her ribs, but she refused to relinquish it. On deck, she was greeted by the handful of loyal crew and guards who had remained behind, their eyes wide with concern and a measure of awe. She managed a weary smile, lifting the egg slightly to indicate what they had won from this perilous venture. No cheers rang out. Valyria's presence stifled any exultation, but she could see admiration and relief in their expressions. The captain, a thin, nervous man with hollow cheeks, hurried forward, wringing his cap in his hands. "Your Grace," he said, voice quavering, "the men and I feared the worst. You've been gone so long." "We had difficulties," she replied softly. "But we are here now. Prepare to set sail as soon as the tide allows. We leave Valyria behind us." He bowed in haste. "Yes, my queen, right away." Daenerys summoned what energy she had left to walk toward her cabin. She heard Jorah dismissing the Unsullied to their stations. Her footsteps dragged. Inside her small quarters, the windows revealed the city's cursed skyline one last time before it fell away behind the curve of the ship. She eased onto a narrow bench, setting the egg upon the table with infinite care. For a moment she simply stared at it, her limbs trembling from exhaustion and relief. Memory threaded through her. The horrors of the stone men, the reeling walkway, Garen and Alice with their crossbow and desperate eyes, the sweltering gloom of the catacombs where she found the egg. She had risked everything for it, unsure if it was truly the relic she believed. Now, she wondered what price she would ultimately pay for bringing it into the light. She laid a palm against the egg, letting her eyes close. Was there life within waiting for the right spark? Or was it just stone, a silent reminder of what Valyria had been? She listened, wanting to sense something, anything, but heard only the soft whimper of the wind against the cabin walls, and her own pulse thrumming in her ears. Perhaps the answer would only come with time and fire. Weariness overtook her at last. Her entire body ached, and she realized she had not slept properly since before they entered the city's ruins. She doubted she would find peaceful rest tonight. Too many nightmares lurked in her mind. But she had to try. Rising, she locked the cabin door and slipped the egg into a padded chest meant for her personal belongings. As an added precaution, she draped cloth around it to keep it from rattling if the seas were rough. Carefully, she let her hand linger on its scaled surface for one last moment. Then she closed the chest, turning the key with a sound that felt final. There would be time later to unravel the mysteries, to test the boundaries of what might still thrive within that shell. For now, her body demanded respite. She curled up on the narrow bunk, pulling a thin blanket over herself despite the lingering heat that clung to her. The cabin lamp cast a weak glow, flickering with each sway of the ship. She stared at the shadows on the ceiling, mind drifting through jumbled reflections. The doom-laden spires, the swirling mists, the sorrow etched into the ruins. She saw flashes of the egg cradled in her arms, then visions of Balerion, the monstrous black dread, casting the entire land in shadow as he soared overhead. Could that lineage truly have lain dormant all these centuries? Could she, Daenerys Stormborn, raise such a dragon? She did not know, but she felt certain that fate had guided her steps through the labyrinth of Valyria and delivered that relic to her hands. Whether for good or ill, that legacy was now hers. Perhaps in some distant day, she would stand before her people, not with 1 or 3 dragons, but with a beast that rivaled the legends of old. Or perhaps she would bury the egg in a tomb of her own making, deeming it too dangerous to awaken. She could not say. Exhaustion finally claimed her. She sank into fitful slumber, lulled by the ship's rocking and the distant cry of gulls circling overhead. Dreams rose and fell in her mind, some wrapped in flames, others in soft memory. She dreamed of a land renewed, free of the chains of old horrors. She dreamed of flying once more, a blaze of black wings stretching across the horizon. And in every dream, that egg seemed to pulse, whispering ancient secrets she could only half understand. Sometime in the early hours, she awoke with a start, the echo of a dragon's roar reverberating in her ears. She bolted upright, heart pounding. The cabin was dim. Outside, the ship groaned as it navigated slow waters, the waves lapping dully against the hull. She listened for a moment, unsure if the roar was real, or just another dream. Nothing stirred. Silence pressed in. Her gaze traveled to the locked chest. She almost rose to check it, to run her hands over the eggshell and reassure herself that she had not imagined everything. But she stayed where she was, pulling the blanket tighter, letting her breathing slow. If the city's ghosts had followed her in spirit, they had no power here. She was Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the blood of the dragon, mother of dragons. She had walked through fire before and emerged unburnt. Whatever was to come, she would face it. She pressed her palms together, closed her eyes, and allowed the breath to wash away the last vestiges of the nightmare. In her mind, she pictured the egg once more. Silent, waiting, full of promise and peril. This was the legacy she had risked her life to claim, and she would not turn aside from it, no matter how formidable. Above deck, the ship's crew was gradually bringing them away from the haunted waters. When dawn came, perhaps she would stand on the prow and watch Valyria fade into the distance, a black smudge on the horizon. Perhaps she would feel sorrow for what had been lost. Perhaps she would feel triumph for having seized what she sought. More than likely, she would feel both. But for now, she lay down once again, letting her eyes drift shut. She slept then, deeper than she had in days, lulled by the lullaby of the sea, the knowledge that she had escaped the city's grasp, and the hope that this new relic of an ancient age might hold the key to a different future for House Targaryen. One she alone would shape. And in the gentle hush of her dreams, she thought she heard the faintest echo of wings beating against the sky. Daenerys awoke to the insistent creaking of timber all around her, a chorus of tension and shifting weight that filled the silent spaces left by the ship's crew. The light in her cabin was dim, filtered through the small round window that peered out upon a gray dawn. She blinked groggily, taking a moment to remember where she was. Not the scorched ruins of Valyria, but safe, relatively safe, on the ship that carried her from that haunted place. Her body felt stiff and bruised, a testament to days spent trekking through that labyrinth of dust and ruins. When she tried to shift, her muscles complained in protest. She swallowed hard against a dryness in her throat, recalling how the sulphurous air had scraped her lungs and made her cough. Sitting up, she ran a hand through her tangled hair, letting the thin blanket slip from her shoulders. For a moment, she heard only her own breathing, slow and uneven. Then other sounds seeped in. Muffled footsteps on the deck overhead, the distant slap of waves, the quiet hum of men speaking in low voices somewhere beyond her cabin door. On instinct, she reached out toward the wooden chest at the foot of her bed, reassuring herself that it had not vanished like a dream. It was still there, locked, containing the egg. A shiver ran through her. For a heartbeat, her imagination soared back to the moment she first laid eyes on the dark, scaled shell among the ruins. The intensity of that memory rekindled the same fierce hope, and the same quiet dread. The egg might be as barren as stone, or it might contain life unlike any the world had known for centuries, life that could reshape her destiny forever. She rose from the bunk, wincing at the ache in her legs. Slipping her feet into soft shoes, she stretched her arms, rolling her shoulders until some tension eased from them. She felt the faint roll of the ship beneath her, a gentle sway that was oddly comforting. Valyria was behind them. Whatever lay ahead on the open sea, it had to be preferable to that cursed city's shadows. After a time, she splashed water on her face from the small basin, ignoring how cold it felt against her skin. She peeled away her travel-stained tunic and replaced it with a fresh one made of light linen, the best she could find among her sparse belongings. Then she crossed the cramped space to the chest and knelt before it, pressing her palm over the lid. She hesitated, aware that she had locked it for a reason. The key hung around her neck on a thin chain. It would take only a moment to open the lock and check the egg. But she told herself there was no immediate need. If it was still inert, she would only be reminded of her uncertainty. And if it wasn't, she shut her eyes, acknowledging the wave of conflicting emotions that thought evoked. Best to wait, she decided, until her mind was clear. She stood, tucked the key under her tunic, and steadied herself with a deep breath before heading for the door. Outside, the corridors were narrow and dimly lit by lanterns that swung gently with the ship's motion. Two Unsullied stood guard at the far end, motionless in their armor, spears upright. They inclined their heads when they saw her, but said nothing. She nodded back, comforted by their presence. When she reached the deck, the pale light of morning met her gaze. It had rained earlier, judging by the slickness on the wooden planks, though the sky now was only a smudged tapestry of clouds. She inhaled deeply. Even the brine-laden air of the sea, tinged though it was with a lingering sulfuric memory, felt cleaner than Valyria's oppressive atmosphere. A small cluster of crewmen were at their tasks, trimming sails, checking rigging, some hoisting crates. Their eyes flicked to her, then away. She found Jorah at the prow, arms folded over the rail, peering out toward the horizon. His features were taut, as if worry had carved lines into his face overnight. When she came up beside him, he gave her a faint nod. "Khaleesi," he said quietly. Then his gaze flicked past her, a quick check to ensure no one was within easy earshot. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she replied honestly. "But better than I did in that city. The ship's motion may lull me to sleep again if I'm not careful." He offered a brief half-smile. "If only we could all rest. The captain says the seas ahead can be treacherous. The same fiery vents that plague Valyria can sometimes stir the water. But with luck, we'll steer clear of trouble." "Without him." She followed his gaze, which lingered on the faint silhouette of Valyria now receding behind them. Even from this distance she could see the faint haze of smoke that clung to the skyline, the jagged shapes of towers rising like broken fangs. A shudder ran through her. It was as though the city itself would not release them without leaving some lasting mark. "How long until we clear these waters?" she asked, voice low. He rubbed his chin, still dusted with stubble. "Perhaps 2 days, if the wind holds. After that, we can hug the coast of Essos. Choose a safe port for resupply." "Then a peignoir." She nodded, letting the silence settle. Then more softly she said, "Thank you for what you did there. For keeping me upright when I nearly fell. For everything." He gave a slight bow of his head. "I serve you, Daenerys. Always." A gust of wind whipped across the deck, stirring her silver hair. She pressed her lips together, glancing around. She noticed the Unsullied standing watch near the helm. Their posture relaxed but alert. Beyond them, the ship's captain conferred with another crewman, probably discussing their next heading. She wondered if any of them guessed the nature of the relic she carried. Perhaps they suspected she had found something precious, but it was unlikely they knew the depth of its significance. At length, she made her way along the deck, letting the salty breeze brush against her face. She paused at the ship's side, resting her hands on the rail. The waters here were dark, flecked with foam. She could see streaks of red or orange in places, likely from volcanic minerals, but they were nothing like the molten flows near Valyria's shores. She tried to imagine washing away the last traces of that cursed place, letting the sea do its work to cleanse her mind of the gloom that had settled there. The day passed in a slow rhythm. Sometimes the sun broke free of the clouds, casting the deck in a muted glow. She ate a meager midday meal in her cabin, too tired to mingle with the crew. Once alone, she finally succumbed to curiosity. With careful fingers, she slipped the key from around her neck and opened the chest. The egg lay upon folded linens, as dark as she remembered, its scales refracting only the faintest glimmer of light. She ran her hand over its curved shell, feeling a subtle coolness, no trace of warmth. "Are you alive or just a dream?" she murmured, her voice catching in her throat. She recalled the day, years past, when she had first held the trio of eggs he received from Magister Illyrio. They too had been cold to the touch, mere stones to the outside world. Yet they had awoken in the flames. Could she conjure that miracle once more, for a single egg so old it might predate the doom itself? Her rational mind told her it was unlikely. Her heart, steeped in Targaryen lore, whispered that it could be done. Eventually, she closed the chest again. She would not let her hopes rise too high. If the day came when she needed more dragons, she would find a way. Until then, the egg would remain locked, protected. She slipped the key beneath her tunic, letting it rest over her heart. That evening, she joined Jorah for a brief council with the captain, who had set a course that would take them through calmer waters. With luck, they would avoid rumored pirate dens and steer clear of rocky shoals. The night was uneventful, though Daenerys felt restless. She walked the deck under the wan glow of lanterns, letting her mind drift. The stars above were faint, half veiled by drifting clouds. She tried to find comfort in their distant presence, thinking of how, once upon a time, her ancestors had charted the skies in search of portents. She saw no portents now, only a swirling darkness. When she finally slipped back into her cabin, the hush enveloped her. She lit a single candle, then let herself collapse upon the bunk, heedless of removing her shoes. Her exhausted body claimed her within moments, and she fell into a dreamless sleep. Morning brought a better sky, with sunlight breaking through. Daenerys woke to a knock at her door, one of the crewmen timidly announcing that breakfast was available. She thanked him and stretched her aching arms, deciding she would take whatever meager food they had and force herself to eat. She suspected the day would be long. The sea was calmer now, the ship's gentle sway less nauseating. Perhaps she would have time to gather her thoughts, or speak with Jorah more openly about the future. She found him near the stern, where he sometimes went to watch the wake of the ship. A half-eaten bowl of porridge sat on a crate nearby. He greeted her with a slight tilt of his head. "We're making good time," he remarked, nodding at the horizon. "The winds are in our favor." She settled beside him, her own wooden bowl in hand. The porridge was bland, but she spooned it into her mouth dutifully, ignoring the lack of flavor. "2 days, you said, to clear these waters. Maybe less if the wind holds." He cast her a sideways glance. "You look better this morning, Khaleesi." She returned a faint smile. "I'm trying to put that city out of my mind, but it has a way of lingering." Her voice trailed off, recalling the ghostly shapes of stone men. "It's difficult to believe we truly survived it." He nodded solemnly. "I've seen many things in my life, but that place..." He shook his head. "No wonder so few ever return." She ate the rest of her breakfast in silence, letting the sunlight soak into her skin. The ship's rigging creaked softly, the sails pulling taut with the breeze. Something about the sight of the crew performing their duties, day after day, offered reassurance that life went on, no matter the horrors behind them. By mid-morning she found her way to the captain, who stood at the helm, squinting at the watery horizon. He was a man of middle years, lean from a lifetime at sea, with a nervous habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he spoke. He bowed his head to her respectfully. "Your Grace," he said, "we've charted a course that might get us around the chain of small volcanic isles to the east. The waters can be tricky, but I'll do my best." Daenerys nodded. "What of storms?" "A squall might blow in from the southern seas," he admitted, glancing at the sky. But if we hold this heading, we should avoid the worst of it. She admired his calm, even if it was layered with caution. Very well, carry on. As the day progressed, Daenerys busied herself checking on the Unsullied. Though most had fared well, she discovered that a few bore minor injuries from their trek through Valyria, scrapes, bruises, small burns from the scalding air. She watched as they tended each other in stoic silence. Grey Worm was not among them, of course. He remained in Meereen, or wherever her forces were now assembled. But she saw the same discipline in these men that had once inspired her. Despite their wounds, they made no complaint, performing each task with quiet efficiency. She offered them words of gratitude, though they showed little reaction beyond polite bows. That was the Unsullied way, after all. But inside, she felt her respect for them deepen further. They had followed her into the heart of a nightmare without flinching, and here they were, scouring the deck and assisting the crew, as though it were just another day. Another night came, calm and clear, the moon casting silvery ribbons across the waves. She lingered on the deck, watching the horizon for any sign of those rumored volcanic isles. A small portion of her worried that some monstrous silhouette might rise from the water, a final curse from Valyria's depths. But nothing appeared beyond the roll of the sea. The men at the helm looked relaxed. She let herself breathe. Late that night, she lay in her bunk half asleep when she felt something, a stirring in her dreams. She could not say if it was the rocking of the ship or the whisper of the wind. Her mind conjured the memory of heat, a surge of flame that licked around her. The sensation of stepping into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre all those years ago. She saw those 3 eggs from Illyrio, how they cracked open, how Drogon first shrieked at the moon. She smelled smoke and heard the crackling hiss of new life. In that moment, she felt the beat of a dragon's heart. But then, the dream dissolved, leaving her alone in the darkness, with only the ship's creaks for company. In the morning, a gentle rain pattered against the deck, though it did not escalate into a full storm. Daenerys rose early, determined to put her restless mind to some use. She ventured out, letting the cool rain wash over her hair and shoulders for a time, as if cleansing away the last vestiges of that dream. Jorah found her standing by the rail, droplets running down her cheeks, and handed her a simple oilskin cloak. "You'll catch a chill," he said, not scolding but genuinely concerned. She pulled the cloak around her without complaint. The sky was gray, and the sea matched it, a slate expanse that swallowed any reflection of light. "I needed the rain," she murmured. "It feels like it's rinsing away the dust of that place." He took her meaning. "Does it help?" She nodded, letting her gaze drift to the horizon. "A little." They stood in companionable silence for a while, listening to the patter of water on the deck. Eventually Daenerys turned to him, a question forming in her mind. "Jorah, do you recall any stories of such ancient eggs? I wonder if there's a precedent for something so old hatching." He pursed his lips in thought, eyes narrowing as he considered the question. "I recall old tales. The Targaryens and Valyrians sometimes stored eggs in hidden vaults for decades, waiting for the right conditions. But centuries, that's another matter. I've heard that a dragon egg can stay dormant for immeasurably long if the conditions aren't right. But so many attempts to hatch old eggs ended in failure. You were the only one to succeed in generations, as far as we know." Nebensi. She looked down at her hands, remembering the feel of that scaled shell. "It might just be stone," she said quietly. "But if it isn't," he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Give yourself time. If it's meant to be, you'll know when to act." His words rang with reassurance. She appreciated that he did not try to push her one way or another. She knew he was loyal, that he believed in her destiny as the mother of dragons. But he also understood caution. She let the conversation end there. The day was still young. Another day at sea. They passed small islets of black rock, steaming in the distance. Captain navigated them carefully around pockets of volcanic activity. Now and then, they saw spouts of steam rising from the water's surface, where submerged fissures released scorching gas. But the ship steered clear without issue. Around midday, the rain gave way to a patchy sunshine, which dried the deck and allowed the crew to air out their damp clothes. Daenerys found a corner near the stern to rest, letting the sun warm her face. She tried not to dwell on the fate of the egg. Instead, she allowed her thoughts to roam to other concerns. She had left Meereen some time ago, traveling under secrecy to Valyria, after hearing that rumor about a smuggler's shard. She wondered if Meereen still stood strong in her absence, if her allies there continued to govern in her name, or if new conflicts had arisen. She trusted Grey Worm and Missandei and the council she had assembled, but she also knew how fragile peace could be. Yet, for all those concerns, she could not ignore what she held in that chest below deck. If it truly was an egg of Balerion's line, it could be a powerful symbol, or a weapon. Perhaps that was what she needed, a sign that House Targaryen's claim to dragons did not rest on the 3 she had already brought into the world. The war for the Iron Throne had cost her dearly, in ways that still haunted her. If she ever stood again before those who questioned her birthright, a living dragon of ancient stock would be an answer none could dispute. But she remembered, too, the blood and fire that had once consumed the world when the Targaryens unleashed their might. She felt torn between ambition and restraint. She recognized the swirl of those thoughts and forced herself to breathe deep. Jorah was right. There was time. No need to act rashly. The egg wasn't going anywhere, not unless she chose to do something about it. As evening came, the seas grew calm enough that some of the crew fished off the starboard side, pulling up small, silver-bellied creatures that flopped and glinted in the dying light. Daenerys found a moment of simple pleasure in that sight, a reminder that not every day was war and suffering. Sometimes, life could still hold these modest routines. Men fishing, water lapping, a quiet sunset. She dined on the fresh fish that night, grilled on a small brazier. The taste was salty and rich, a welcome change from the dried rations. Even Jorah managed a small smile as he ate. It felt for an instant almost like they were on a simple voyage, unburdened by the ghosts of Valyria or the weight of an ancient egg. But that night, the wind shifted. Dark clouds gathered overhead, snuffing out the stars. The temperature fell, and the waves began to churn with more vigor. The captain ordered the sails to be reefed, anticipating a squall. Daenerys paced the deck with Jorah at her side, watching the water turn black and restless, flecked with phosphorescent crests. Lightning flickered in the distance, too far away to hear the thunder yet. "Storm's coming," the captain called grimly, his hand tight on the helm. "Might be a nasty one." Daenerys studied the horizon. She saw the flicker again, a jagged tier of white that illuminated the roiling clouds. She nodded at the captain. "Do what you must to keep the ship safe." Your Grace." He barked orders, sending crewmen scurrying to secure loose cargo and tighten ropes. The sails were drawn in so only a small portion remained, enough to give them some steering power without risking tearing in high winds. The Unsullied formed a line near the cargo hold, where they could intervene if any crates broke free or if the waves threatened to wash debris across the deck. Daenerys felt the first cold droplets of rain on her cheeks. She turned to Jorah. "Go below if you wish. It's about to get rough." He gave a half smile. "I've weathered storms before. I'll stay as long as you do." The words were simple, but she understood the devotion behind them. She gripped the rail as the wind picked up, howling across the deck. More lightning illuminated the swirling clouds. The rain intensified to a stinging downpour that pelted her cloak. Each gust made the ship roll beneath them, pitching starboard, then lurching back. She cast her gaze upward, blinking against the water that ran into her eyes. Part of her remembered the savage storms near the Dothraki Sea, howling winds and drenching rains that had once threatened to sweep her away. Another memory stirred. The storms of Dragonstone, where she had been born as the last scion of House Targaryen in Westeros, amid thunder and lightning. The storms had shaped her beginning, a sign of the tumult her life would hold. The squall arrived in earnest, lashing the ship with surging waves. The deck became treacherous, awash with swirling water. Crewmen shouted over the wind, hauling on ropes, fighting to keep the vessel from being pushed off course. Daenerys braced herself, refusing to retreat to her cabin just yet. She wanted to stand with them, to feel the ship's struggle as it rose and fell. She was a Targaryen after all. Storms were her birthright. Another flash of lightning revealed the fear on a young crewman's face as he tried to secure a rope that threatened to whip free. An older sailor rushed to help him, pulling the rope taut and binding it around a cleat. The Unsullied held fast, drenched and grim, their discipline unwavering even in the gale. Daenerys marveled at their stoicism, how they seemed immune to fear or exhaustion. Her own heart hammered with the adrenaline of the storm. The egg crossed her mind, locked in her cabin, in that chest. She briefly wondered if the ship's violent pitch could damage it, but the chest was wedged firmly, and the linens padded it well. Even if the sea rocked them for hours, she doubted it would crack. Another lightning bolt streaked across the sky, turning the world white for an instant. Thunder followed, distant but ominous. The downpour made it impossible to remain on deck without risk of being swept off her feet. She exchanged a look with Jorah, and nodded reluctantly toward the hatch that led below. If she was cast into the sea, Valyria's egg would be lost with her, and she refused to let that be the end of this journey. They descended carefully, each step a battle against the tilting floor. The lanterns below deck swung wildly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The smell of wet wood and fear mingled in the cramped corridors. Crewmen rushed back and forth, checking for leaks. The timbers groaned, and water dripped in through tiny seams in the hull. Daenerys made her way to her cabin, water streaming off her cloak. She pushed open the door and stumbled inside, nearly colliding with the table. The boat lurched violently, sending a cup clattering off the edge. She braced herself against the bunk, gasping as the movement forced the breath from her lungs. Jorah followed, closing the door behind him to keep out the worst of the spray. "Damn storm," he muttered, water dripping from his hair. "I've seen squalls, but this might last through the night." She nodded, heart pounding. "It's strong indeed," but the captain seemed capable. The cabin was dimly lit by a single lantern, flickering with each tilt. Daenerys knelt, checking on the chest. It had not moved an inch, thanks to the rope she had tied around it earlier. She pressed a hand to the lid, reassuring herself that the egg was still safe within. The smell of damp cloth and salt rose from the floorboards. A particularly fierce wave struck the hull, making the ship shudder. Daenerys felt her stomach lurch. Her entire body tensed as she waited for the worst of it to pass. Then with a groan, the ship righted itself, and she managed to steady her breathing. "Sit," Jorah advised, indicating the bunk. He braced his feet wide to keep himself upright. "At least wait until the waves calm a bit." She lowered herself onto the bunk, hands on her knees, cloak dripping onto the floor. She felt the roll of the ship as if it were the beating of her own heart, constant and unyielding. Thunder rumbled again, a bit closer this time. For a time, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the deck overhead, and the timbers creaked in protest. Daenerys closed her eyes, recalling the desert dryness of Valyria, the suffocating heat. Now here she was, in the midst of a storm at sea. The world was full of contrasts, full of trials. She tried to ground herself. In her cabin, the egg was near. She was alive. She had her loyal guard and Jorah's steadfast presence. Her mind drifted to the future. Where would she go once she made landfall? She had told few of her advisors about this expedition. Perhaps she would return to Meereen? Or perhaps she would seek out a new path. The promise of the egg might embolden her to consider a course that was once unthinkable. To sail west once more, test her claim, rally the support that remained in Westeros. Or maybe she would bide her time in the east, building alliances, letting the name Targaryen rise again in rumor and hope. She felt the weight of the decision press upon her. Finally, the storm's tempo shifted, easing just slightly, as though the squall had reached its peak and begun to lose some of its fury. Jorah noticed it too, relaxing a fraction. "Seems to be dying down," he said, wiping moisture from his brow. She nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Let's hope so." They waited an hour, perhaps more, as the storm raged outside. The ship rolled repeatedly, but no wave overwhelmed it. She listened for the urgent shouts of the crew, and heard fewer as time passed, suggesting they were gaining control of the situation. Jorah went to check outside once or twice, reporting back that the captain believed the worst was over. At length, with the thunder receding, and the rain diminished to a steady patter, Daenerys felt the tension in her shoulders begin to fade. She rose from the bunk and unfastened her soaked cloak, hanging it from a hook. Her hair clung to her face and she pushed it back, letting out a weary breath. She looked to Jorah. "Thank you for staying with me. It helps to have a friend in storms like these." "Son," he responded with a quiet nod, a faint flush creeping into his cheeks. "It's the least I can do." Night wore on, and the storm shrank to a distant rumble. Eventually, Daenerys found her body weighed down by fatigue. The adrenaline of the day, the worry about the egg, and the tossing seas sapped her strength. She motioned for Jorah to rest in the corridor or find a hammock among the crew. Her cabin was cramped, and she had no mind to make him stand guard by her bed all night. He protested mildly, but she insisted, reminding him that the Unsullied were also posted throughout the ship. She locked her door once he had gone, then crossed to the chest. The motion of the vessel was gentler now, a steady sway. She felt a flicker of impulse. Should she open the chest, hold the egg, draw comfort from it? Or would it only stir more questions she had no answer for? After a moment, she decided to leave it be. She was too tired, too uncertain. Let the egg remain as it was, safe and sleeping. She doused the lantern and lay down on her bunk, the ship's rocking lulling her once more. When she closed her eyes, she thought of dragon wings and storm clouds, a tapestry of memories and dreams merging. Her last conscious thought was a silent vow that she would not let fear govern her choices. The egg was hers by blood and fate, and whatever came next, she would be ready. She woke the next morning to the faint gold of sunlight filtering through the porthole. The sky had cleared overnight, and the air that breezed in smelled fresh, as though the storm had scrubbed it clean. The ship no longer lurched precariously, but glided forward with measured grace. Daenerys rose, relieved to feel steady underfoot. She took a moment to wash her face and hands with water from the pitcher, wiping away the salt crust that had dried on her skin. Outside, the deck was awash in brightness. Sailors moved about, cleaning up debris from the storm, checking for damage. Jorah, still streaked with dried salt, was helping the captain's men secure a loose section of railing. Daenerys offered her help, and though they insisted they would handle the manual labor, she still carried a few ropes to show solidarity. By midday, the deck was in order, and the morale improved. The horizon stretched wide, the sea shimmering like glass in places where the wind died. It felt like a different world from the night before. A few of the men even laughed as they recounted the worst moments of the storm, pride in having survived intact. The ship's hull had suffered only minor leaks, easily patched. The sails held strong. Daenerys found herself gazing at the chest in her cabin again later that afternoon, when the sun was high and the journey calm. She did not open it, but she thought of what it contained. The impulse to hold the egg was strong, a yearning. She wondered if that was the Targaryen heritage calling her, the same force that had drawn her into Drogon's flames. She pressed a hand to the lid, feeling the wood's warmth under the sun's light. She thought she detected a flicker of heat through the chest, but it might have been her imagination. She did not have the chance to linger. A rap at the door pulled her attention. Jorah's voice, announcing that the captain had sighted a coastline. She stood, brushing her hands down her tunic, and left the cabin. Up on deck, the men were abuzz, pointing off to the northeast, where the faint outline of land cut across the horizon. It was not a large city, more likely a minor port or fishing village, but it would be enough for them to resupply and rest after all they had endured. Daenerys scanned the shoreline, unsure of the place's name. The captain believed it to be a small settlement known for trade in fish and salt. He promised to sail close enough to see if they could dock, though he warned that foreigners might be met with suspicion. Daenerys nodded, content to let him negotiate. Her goal was simply to step onto solid ground for a while, feel the earth beneath her feet. They closed in on the port with the day's last hours of sunlight. From a distance, Daenerys could see a handful of docks, small and rickety, jutting out into the bay. Beyond them lay a cluster of squat buildings, with roofs of red tile, smoky chimneys hinting at hearth fires within. A short fence or palisade enclosed the village, likely more to deter wildlife than to fend off serious invaders. The ship anchored just offshore, and the captain took a rowboat in, accompanied by 2 of his men, to speak with whoever governed the port. Daenerys waited, tension humming in her veins. She imagined how it would feel to stand on land again after days of rocking water, and especially after her ordeal in Valyria. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a dusty orange. At last, the captain returned, a faint smile of success on his face. They could dock for the night, resupply, perhaps trade goods for fresh produce. He warned Daenerys, however, that the locals seemed wary of large armed retinues. Best to keep a low profile. She agreed. By the time the ship was secured at the rough wooden pier, dusk was fully upon them. Lanterns swung from posts along the dock. The smell of roasting fish wafted through the air, making Daenerys' stomach twist with hunger. She had not eaten well since the storm. She cast a quick glance at the chest in her cabin, deciding the egg would be safe locked away under guard. She assigned 4 Unsullied to remain on the ship at all times, and the rest could rotate in pairs if they wished to stretch their legs. Taking Jorah by her side, she stepped down the gangplank onto the creaking boards of the dock. The motion felt strange after so many days at sea, and she steadied herself with a hand on Jorah's arm. The village smelled of salt and cooking fires, a far cry from the suffocating stench of volcanic fumes and decay. A few villagers stood at a distance, eyeing the newcomers uncertainly. They proceeded up a short slope to the main cluster of buildings. Most were single-story, with shuttered windows and small signs advertising fish or salted goods. A handful of villagers milled about, finishing their day's work. Some men carried nets or crates of fish from small boats. Others stacked barrels near a makeshift warehouse. Daenerys noticed how they glanced at her hair, her clothing, the presence of Jorah's sword. She hoped to avoid any trouble. The captain led them to a modest building that served as a tavern of sorts, though calling it that might have been generous. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grilled eel and cheap ale. A surly man behind a counter raised an eyebrow as they entered. The captain exchanged a few words, and soon a plate of steaming fish and a pitcher of ale were set down at a rough wooden table. Daenerys slid onto a creaking bench, exhaustion tugging at her bones. She let Jorah and the captain do most of the talking. She caught snippets about docking fees, the cost of water casks, and the trade for dried fruit they carried in the ship's hold. On occasion, the barkeep shot her curious glances, but he asked no questions. She assumed he recognized in her some foreign dignity, but decided not to pry. She ate the fish quietly, savoring the simple spices. Her mind drifted to what lay behind and ahead. She could remain in this village for a time, but it offered no answers about what to do with the egg. It was merely a respite, a place to gather strength before continuing her journey. Jorah noticed her silence. He leaned close, voice low. "All well, Khaleesi." She nodded, finishing a bite. "Just tired. My mind never seems to rest." He gave a sympathetic grunt. "We'll depart soon enough. Once we have supplies, we can decide on our next course. But for now, let yourself breathe." Nemratatin. She managed a small smile. The tavern's bustle provided a rare sense of normalcy, locals grumbling over the day's haul, the hiss of meat on a hot pan, the clink of cups. She could pretend, for an hour, that she was simply a traveler passing through. No dragons, no crown, no curses from ancient cities. But the pretense could not last. Before long, a few curious souls sidled over to the table, men with sun-worn skin, reeking of the sea. They asked in halting common tongue about their origins, their destination. The captain navigated their questions, offering half-truths. They were traders from across the sea, traveling to and fro with goods. The men seemed to accept the explanation, though some suspicious glances lingered. Daenerys finished her meal and rose, dropping a few coins, silver from Meereen, which the barkeep eyed warily. She gestured to Jorah, and they made their way outside into the crisp night air. The village lay quiet now, only a few torches burning along the main path. She could see the dark outline of the bay, where their ship rocked gently at the pier. The air carried a faint tang of fish and brine, yet it was infinitely preferable to Valyria's sulfur. She stepped away from the tavern, gazing at the star-scattered sky, letting her lungs fill with night air. Yura stood beside her, arms folded. After a moment, she spoke softly, mindful of curious ears. "It's strange," she said. "I feel as if I have two different worlds within me. The world that led me to that egg, that believes in the power of dragons, the destiny of the Targaryens, and another world that craves only peace, a home free of curses and war. Mepei." He considered her words, then responded in the same hushed tone. "No one can tell you which to choose, Daenerys. You carry both. Perhaps you always will." She sighed. "Perhaps. But I can't see the end of this path. I only know I can't linger forever in small fishing villages or hide aboard a single ship." She tipped her head back, eyes on the sky. "I have to decide whether to waken that egg, or let it remain stone. Whether to use it as a symbol to rally men, or keep it secret." He gazed at her, the torchlight highlighting the concern in his eyes. "You don't have to decide tonight." "No," she agreed. "Not tonight." They walked in silence back to the pier. The air felt cooler near the water, stirring her cloak. On the ship's deck, the Unsullied stood watch, their silhouettes outlined by lantern glow. Daenerys realized her legs trembled from exhaustion. That meal had renewed some of her strength, but her bones still felt leaden. She climbed the gangplank with care, greeted the guards, and headed below deck. Outside her cabin door, she paused, pressing her palm to the wood, recalling how that chest was only a few feet away, containing an entire legacy. She could almost sense it in her blood, a hum that bridged centuries. She entered the cabin, sealing the door behind her. The lantern light revealed the small table, the bunk, and the chest, all as she had left them. She approached the chest, her hand drifting to the key around her neck. The impulse came again. Open it, cradle that egg, maybe speak to it in an ancient tongue. But she resisted. The day had been long and her body cried out for rest. She removed her cloak and boots, letting them drop by the door, then carefully lay down on the bunk. She thought she might stare at the ceiling for hours, mind restless. But in truth, her fatigue was too great. Within moments, her eyes shut, and she slipped into a dream-haunted realm. She found herself wandering a corridor of black stone, the egg clutched in her arms. Torchlight flickered over carvings of dragons. A voice, distant echoing, called her name in a language she barely recognized. She turned, searching for its source, but saw only the swirling gloom. Then a flash of heat, a roar. She jolted awake with a soft cry. She lay there, heart pounding. The cabin was dark except for a small sliver of moonlight through the porthole. The chest remained closed, no sign of any glow or sound. She forced her breathing to steady. Just another dream, no different from those that had plagued her since she left Valyria's shores. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket tighter around her, and willed herself to sleep again. Morning came with the clamor of the crew preparing to unload a portion of their trade goods. Daenerys rose, pinching the bridge of her nose against a dull headache. She splashed water on her face, then dressed quickly. When she went on deck, the captain informed her that they planned to remain here for at least half a day, bartering with the locals for fish, water, and fresh vegetables, if any were available. She considered going ashore again, but decided to remain on the ship for now. The fewer eyes on her, the better. Jorah would handle any negotiations on her behalf if necessary. So she sat beneath a coil of rope near the bow, shading her eyes from the early sun, thinking of the path ahead. They had enough provisions to last another journey, either back toward Meereen or north along the coast. She mulled over her options. Perhaps returning to Meereen was best, ensuring that her seat of power remained stable. There, she could store the egg in safety and consult with those few she trusted, or research further how to coax it into life, should she choose to. She knew, too, that the more people learned about its existence, the greater the risk. Word would spread that Daenerys Targaryen possessed a fabled egg from Valyria. Enemies might seek to steal it or sabotage her cause. Allies might flock to her or fear her. Was it wise to keep it secret? Could she hide something of such magnitude for long? Her thoughts spun until a headache formed. Eventually she closed her eyes and turned her face toward the sun, letting the warmth sink into her skin. The air smelled of sea brine and faint smoke from village fires. In the background, she heard the chatter of the crew hauling crates, the occasional call of a gull circling overhead, a world away from the hush of Valyria. Jorah returned later that morning with baskets of fish and some salted vegetables, along with fresh water casks. He reported that the locals were amenable to trade, though suspicious of foreigners. Daenerys merely nodded, content that they had what they needed. The rest of the day passed with little event. By late afternoon, the captain was eager to set sail again, mindful of the capricious tides. Daenerys agreed. She had lingered long enough, and it was time to move on. The anchors were raised, and the sails unfurled. The small village grew tiny behind them, a cluster of red-roofed huts fading into the distance. Daenerys stood at the stern a moment, watching it recede. She felt a pang of regret, leaving behind a place of relative peace so soon. But she was no ordinary traveler, free to wander. She had a destiny to consider, and an egg that bound her to it. As the ship caught the wind and glided forward, Daenerys made her way to her cabin. She opened the door and stood before the chest, the key cool in her hand. With a measured motion, she unlocked the lid and carefully lifted it. There lay the egg, dark as the night sky, scales shimmering with hints of red in the lantern light. She let out a soft breath, running her fingers over its surface. It was cool, perhaps even colder than before. "It's just you and me now," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "I carried you from Valyria. I don't know what that means yet." She closed her eyes, remembering the swirl of flame that had once hatched Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Remembering how her own spirit had ignited with them, forging a bond that felt deeper than blood. Could that same flame awaken this ancient shell? Or would it consume her this time? Slowly, she slipped her arms around the egg, lifting it from the chest. Its weight pressed into her ribs, familiar yet strange. She held it against her abdomen, feeling the curve of its shell beneath her palms. Silence. No tremor of life, no warm pulse. Yet, she sensed something. A potential, like the hush before a storm. She stood there for many moments, letting the ship's motion shift her balance. The hush in the cabin was profound, broken only by the creak of boards and the distant cry of a sailor on deck. Her mind drifted to a future where she might stand once again in dragonfire, the shell cracking, a new whelp bursting forth. Was it her right to attempt that? To summon another creature of such power into a world already scarred by conflict? She thought of Balerion, the Black Dread. How the histories said that dragons' wings had darkened the sky over entire kingdoms. She thought of how Aegon the Conqueror had used Balerion to forge the Iron Throne. And she thought of the devastation wrought in that conquest, the fear and awe that followed Targaryen dragons wherever they flew. Her hands trembled, but she did not set the egg down. She felt caught between wonder and responsibility, between the call of her blood and the caution gleaned from her trials. At last, she gently lowered the egg back onto the linens. She stroked its scaled surface one final time and closed the chest. The lock clicked into place, final and resolute. When she emerged on deck, the sun was dipping low behind them, casting the ocean in shades of gold and lavender. Jorah approached, curiosity in his gaze. She offered him a calm smile, though she knew her eyes must be shadowed with the burden of her thoughts. "We sail onward," she said, turning her face to the wind. "And whatever awaits, I will face it, like a Targaryen should." He bowed his head in acknowledgement, and neither spoke of the egg directly. Yet Daenerys suspected he understood that its presence weighed on her more each day. The horizon stretched out vast and unknowable. For tonight, at least, the sea remained calm. The future, like the egg in her chest, slumbered, waiting for the moment to crack open and reveal its secrets. She wrapped her cloak tighter about her shoulders and stood at the ship's prow, gazing into the oncoming night, her heart a blend of purpose and uncertainty. She was, after all, Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the blood of the dragon, and she carried within her the legacy of kings and conquerors, of burned cities and broken chains. The choice of how to wield that legacy was hers alone. For now, the gentle hush of the sea and the promise of another sunrise would be enough. She let the wind brush over her face, feeling its salt-kissed breath, imagining the egg below deck lying silent in its chest, each wave of the ocean a lullaby to the secrets it held.